state of the running back position in 2026 fantasy football. That's what we're going to talk about today on episode 2 of The Long View. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find my Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Jakob Sanderson. You can find his Thinking About Thinking newsletter at jakobsanderson.substack.com. And Jacob, we got the first episode out. We got the pod launched. We got some really positive feedback. It was really cool to see. How you doing? How you feeling as we get ready to record episode 2?
I'm doing great, man. I'm super excited to record another episode of the show for you. And like you alluded to, honestly, I want to thank everybody so much to listen to the first episode. Anyone who hit the like buttons, the subscribe buttons, the 5-star ratings buttons, the retweet buttons, it means a lot. If I didn't individually reply to each person, I apologize, but I guarantee you I saw whatever people have said in terms of positive feedback. And I mean, that's the number one reason why we do this, to try and have smart conversations about football that entertain you and that you enjoy. And seeing people's excitement for this certainly increased my already high level of excitement to come in and do a second episode. So just want to thank everybody a ton, and encourage that, please do hit the like buttons, give us the ratings, hit the subscribe. If you're wanting to support us on the Patreon, we would appreciate that a ton, especially in the early going. Like, even if you don't, have the $8 a month to support on the Patreon, doing the likes, doing the ratings, it helps a ton. So I would appreciate that massively.
Great pitch.
How happy are you that
today,
you didn't have to say like and subscribe, please?
Oh my God. This is great. I got a great partner. I'm just going to leave this for you every show. I'm going to do none of that. I hate marketing. It's my least favorite thing about all of this. I got you. You are a shill. This is perfect. I'm excited. I'm excited. For the second episode, we want to talk about the running back position a little bit. We talked about how in the first episode we wanted to zoom out a little bit, talk about the macro trends, where we're at in the NFL, what's been going on. We talked about all of that stuff. Defenses are trying to take away explosives. Offenses are running more. We talked about how pass rate over expected is all negative. 3/4 of the league is negative, and all of those fun elements. And if you have teams running a lot more, if you have fewer explosives, I don't know if we expressly talked about this, but some of the stuff I've looked at and written about is just about how like the wide receivers yardage ceilings don't seem to go as high these days anymore. There's only a couple guys that hit 1,400 yards last year or whatever it is. So you have a world where running backs are scoring points at a higher rate or getting more touches or whatever. Fewer yards overall, but there's more touchdowns because of the field position stuff. All these things that we talked about. You had the great presence of mind to note that the really best way to transition from that macro stuff right into the micro is at the running back position, where prices have been rising, where, as I mentioned, with yardage being down, but shorter fields and a higher percentage of scoring, running backs score a lot of touchdowns. And so that part of it becomes interesting. We're getting a lot of running back points, and there's this whole conversation about whether or not you should pay up for running backs in the modern NFL and all of those things. And that's all the stuff we're going to get to when we get to our main topic. But we have to start with the short view, as we described to everyone. They're hearing me talk about the running backs for the first couple minutes. They're like, you guys promised me the short view. Jacob, you are the short view guy. Take it away.
Yeah, we just got a turnover on defense. We got a short field coming on. So here's today's short view. If anyone has not listened, I'll do more shilling for you, Ben. You and the ETR guys, Jack Miller and Mark Dankebring, just did a fantastic series on the Projections podcast. You guys have been doing those for years, previously with Michael Leone. I've gotten through almost all of them. I think I'm through 6.5 at present right now on the podcast.
Impressive, because they are long.
Yes, yeah, those are not the short view.
No.
And super, super actionable stuff. One of my favorite podcast series to listen to every year, like even before I knew you on a personal level. And so I just kind of went through and I kept a mental tracker of things where Ben's talking and I'm nodding my head in agreement, and other times where I feel like I have a slight point of disagreement. I can say that the agreement list is much longer, but we're not going to focus on that today because that's pretty boring podcasting. So I was going to bring up just a couple of points where what I heard was a little different than my perspective. To some extent, my mind's already been probably changed a little bit, but wanted to sketch those out. The first one is the Detroit Lions, which of course was your NFC North podcast. And I heard you make a pretty compelling case for Jameson Williams taking a big leap in this upcoming season. I believe you had him projected for even more volume than Sam LaPorta, and of course a lot more efficiency than Sam LaPorta. I had written about a month back pretty favorably about LaPorta. I had cited the fact that at the time that Sam LaPorta went out for the season, he was actually outscoring Jameson Williams even in like half-point PPR, non-tight end premium. He was about 4 points ahead in targets per route run at that point in time, I believe. And so I've had a hard time. Like, I see the ADPs with Jameson going right now at the late 4 on Underdog, Sam LaPorta going at the 8-9 turn. To me, I feel like the market is taking sort of these two plausible paths for, why did Jameson Williams have this really impressive end of the season without Sam LaPorta? Was the catalyst for that just the genuine desire to want to increase his role in the offense, especially spurred on by the change at offensive play caller? Or was it as simple as, Sam LaPorta got hurt, they consolidate from kind of being a 4 playmaker offense to a 3 playmaker offense, and Jameson soaks up a lot of that? I've been of the mindset that the market is overly certain that it's the former, and that they're going to be going into this year making Jameson kind of a clear secondary option, which is what the market has it in ADP, is very clearly Amon-Ra 1, Jameson 2, LaPorta 3. I think it's a little bit more ambiguous. I've drafted a lot of LaPorta. I've drafted some Jameson Williams. He's not been a target for me. So it was interesting to hear you come out so favorably on Jameson.
Yeah, I think you described that well. It is the long view, and I guess my perspective would be we got to go back a little further than just 2025, because you were kind of framing it in the two parts of 2025 when LaPorta was healthy and unhealthy, and Jameson Williams' production was very different across those two landscapes. But if you look back to 2024, if I'm looking at it right, Jameson Williams was at 14.1 PPR points per game, and LaPorta was at 10.9, so about 3 points per game, 3.2 points per game different there. And I think that's really pretty relevant. Prior to that, Jameson Williams hadn't really come on. It was late 2023. He obviously had the suspension and everything else. Late 2023 where he started to come on. I think he played his most snaps in the playoff game in 2023. If I'm not mistaken, that's the playoff game where they got eliminated by the 49ers. You had the crazy near interception, ball bounces off the defender, Brandon Ayuk catch, and different things. Crazy game. But Jameson Williams, I think, had a big game in that game, and that was sort of the precursor to, 2024 might be a little bit of a breakout, and it was a little bit of a breakout, but he still wasn't really in a clear full role based on PFF's numbers. He only ran 477 routes in 2024. In 2025, he ran 600 routes. So a big part of my perspective was that he had the slow start to his career. He wasn't doing some of the things that they wanted him to be doing as far as blocking and some of those things, which Campbell now praises, both the last two off seasons. He's praised how hard he works in blocking and all these things. And he's been able to stay on the field a lot more. And I think he's way more of a centerpiece in their offense at this stage. I don't think LaPorta's not, but 2024 was really the season where it kind of came on, and I think Jameson meaningfully outproducing LaPorta was a pretty big discussion point last year, and a lot of people were like, well, LaPorta had the great rookie season the year prior before Jameson had really done anything, and that was still to this day, obviously LaPorta's best season. He had a monster rookie season. His targets per route were 5 percentage points better than either of his two more recent seasons, and he ran the most routes of his career, so just a ton of volume and had a really high TD rate, whatever it was, 10 or 11 touchdowns. And so LaPorta had that great 2023. Jameson had the great 2024 when he comes on, and LaPorta kind of takes a back seat. The way I read the early 2025 stuff was they had talked a little bit in the offseason, hey, we need to do more with LaPorta. Late in 2024, they seemed to be trying to get LaPorta involved more because they kind of forgot about him in the early part of that season. And I think sort of the inverse happened in 2025, which is just sort of that. I mean, you have the running backs now it's just Jahmyr Gibbs. It was Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery, but they're very involved in this offense. And you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who for 3 years running has been the wide receiver 3 overall in PPR and has been a massive volume hog. And so then you have these two guys sort of competing for the third share, if you will, in a pretty concentrated offense and one that has a pretty big pie. But I think in 2024, Williams pretty clearly won that. And then early in 2025, it was, we need to get LaPorta going more. And it was just more about who they were trying to feature, was sort of the way that I was reading it. They went into the bye. I think I referenced this on the show, but they went into the bye and Jared Goff got asked about it. I was reading some of my old Stealing Signal stuff and referenced it because I was trying to make sense of Jameson Williams having such a small role in early 2025. I mean, the part of kind of the way you framed it, where LaPorta getting hurt and then it consolidating on just 3 guys, that I would want a better explanation for is why Jameson Williams was so underutilized in early 2025. And I really do think that the extent of it, and then the extent to which he was featured, because I think the stat I gave on the show was post-bye for the final, whatever it was, 9 games, he had 70-plus yards in 7 of those 9 games. I think for the final 10 games post-bye, he was on a 1,400-yard pace, which there would have been, whatever it is, second or third in the league, because there's not 1,400-yard seasons anymore. It looks like there were 5 last year, actually. I think the year prior was the one where we only had 2. But it's been a lot harder for players. Yeah, the year prior we had 2 1,300-yard seasons in 2024. Didn't even have 3 receivers go for 1,300 yards. Last year we had 5, Amon-Ra St. Brown being one. And Jamar Chase both barely cleared 1,400 yards, and Pickens, they all were within 30 yards anyway. And the 6th place guy, Zay Flowers, about 1,200 yards. 7th place guy, Olave, 1,163. So there's this huge drop-off. We're not seeing these big seasons, 1,400, 1,500-yard receiving seasons. Jameson had production post-bye without LaPorta that was that type of production. I don't think he's going to necessarily do that. But I do think when you look at the routes getting to the ceiling that they did in 2025, you look at the progression of his career, his targets per out for the full season last year were very low. They were lower in the first half. They were higher in the second half. And then as far as LaPorta's concerned, for me, a lot of it is just the injury. I mean, he had a herniated disc and just not being really comfortable with that. And so if this whole logic of mine that they are featuring players in an individual way is true, then LaPorta isn't really in the right position to be featured right now. But I'm like, are you pretty optimistic about the health stuff, or what makes you more optimistic about LaPorta?
I'm pretty optimistic about the health stuff. Like, what I've read is he's going to be a full go at training camp. So I'm not too worried about the health stuff. I think that was actually like today even that might have came out. If you're listening to this, today is not probably the day you're listening to it, but it came out this week. So I haven't been super concerned about that. I mean, I look at the Jameson profile, like 2024, his targets per run, I have it at 17.7%. I'm using PFF data. It was a lot better that's the 2024. 2025, it comes down overall. Of course, it came up at that very end of the season after LaPorta goes down. But even in the sample that LaPorta was healthy, I want to say it was like 16. I don't have the split pulled up right in front of me, but that was the number that is in my head. So I think it's about a 2-point drop. A lot of it was the efficiency, which we know is going to be volatile. Like, he had a pretty incredibly strong post-target efficiency season in 2024, and he had some of that come back in 2025. In early 2025, that just wasn't there. Like, I remember, like, as a person who was generally lower on Jameson last year, like, feeling like there were a couple games where I got kind of lucky, where there was some misconnections. And, like, when you're a player with Jameson Williams' role, I feel like that's just kind of naturally going to be volatile on a week-to-week basis. And you mentioned the routes were up. And so, like, to me, it doesn't seem that surprising that a player who's, like, not able to earn a ton of volume, then they scale him up in routes. Like, you probably will see a couple points drop in the targets per route run aspect. I think I'm just... Like, Jameson Williams to me has always been a remarkably efficient player, remarkably dangerous player, incredible real-life player. I've not seen, except for in fits and starts, like dating back to college, that this is like a volume consolidating player. So to me, like, I look at this, I'm like, Amon-Ra St. Brown is obviously the one. And I would expect pretty similar target volume for the other two, because I think that's just kind of who they are, is like a 16, 17, 18, 19% guy. I mean, obviously you'd project a higher ceiling week to week and a higher yards per target on Jameson. Like LaPorta, for instance, last year had like a ridiculous catch rate that's not going to sustain. I think he had like 89% catch rate, led to a career high in yards per out run. Some of that stuff is unsustainable and will come back the other way. But I don't know that Jameson, like just as a player, is like well-rounded enough to be a guy that like really gaps in terms of the target earning capacity, unless Amon-Ra got hurt.
So then the question is, what if you're wrong about that? Because that's the point. The point is that this may be the year where that happens, that there's enough in the per route profile with the addition of the routes and how that's built over time. I understand your point that the targets per route run naturally might go down as the routes come up. But the answer to your question of it not happening in fits and starts is the end of last year. The final 6 games of the season, Jameson Williams had 8+ targets in 5 of them. So you got to be very confident that Sam LaPorta being out was the only reason for that, and that he's going to go right back to like whatever it was, 4 targets per game or something, like an absurdly low number. When
it wasn't quite that low. Like in 2024,
4.3 pre-bye last year. The first 7
pre-bye,
games of the year.
Pre-bye. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what he was with LaPorta when he wasn't productive. And then post-bye, after LaPorta's gone, he averaged 7.2 targets per game, but he closed even like that wasn't just the first couple games, or it was building in the first couple games. Post-bye, the last thing we saw from him, the final 6 games, the last month and a half, 8+ targets in 5 of those. And again, I'm not saying
though, one of them was the Thanksgiving game that Amon-Ra didn't play in, or I think he got hurt in like the first drive of, and that where everything went on him. The next one was the one that Amon-Ra did play, but he was like, everybody was stunned that he played. Like nobody thought he was going to play until the last minute. He comes out in warmups. So like if something happened to Amon-Ra, then yeah, I think all bets are off. Like I think he could, because I think they would make a lot of intent to use him in ways that are like, maybe not even the most natural way to use him, but where he's just their most dangerous player. I mean, I think that's the fun thing about all the Lions is that they have these 4 playmakers who are all probably a little bit more talented than what they get in this offense. You take any piece out of the puzzle, I think there's a huge ceiling for everybody because, as we saw last year, like they're not going to give it to the rest of the guys. Like it just consolidates on the main guys.
For sure. I broadly, I'm not trying to even be argumentative because I agree with your analysis of Jameson going back to college, not being a guy who has consolidated volume in a major way outside of some individual spots. I guess to the point that you're bringing this up and wondering sort of my thought on it or what might be missing. I mean, I'm looking for guys that are going to have outlier seasons, that they're going to hit that career season, that something sort of changes. I don't know for sure that what happened down the stretch, even though, as you noted, Amon-Ra missed a couple of those games, is going to happen. I do think it looked different in the latter part of last season. We did see. And it's not necessarily there in the per route stuff because maybe they were running more overall routes. They were a little bit more aggressive at that time of the season last year because the targets per route were still below 20% or whatever. But in some respects, it's like targets per game because one of the things you could have said about Jameson Williams, and I made the case, I know along with you because I know you and Davis were arguing about this a lot last year about Jameson Williams, is that he hasn't even had very many games where he's had more than X receptions or whatever. Like he only had several games. Not that many games over like 7 or 8 targets, and a lot of them are deep targets. And so if you go 2024 and earlier in his career, I think there's only like 1 game where he had more than 5 receptions or something, and he hit the exact number 5 a few times. But there's a lot of games at 1, 2.
He hit 7 for the first time that Thanksgiving game without Amon-Ra, and then he did have 7 again in 2 straight weeks after that. So he had his first, second, and third career 7 reception game 3 weeks in a row.
But he also had 3 games last year with 6 receptions, which were the second, third, and fourth times he's done that. And the first time he did that was week 18 of the year prior. And again, with Jameson Williams, you're talking about a guy who didn't play much as a rookie, was suspended in is going into his rookie year, and then was injured in his year 2. He didn't start until week 5 in year 2, or was that the suspension, year 2? I can't remember. But
I think it was year 1 he was late coming. He tore his ACL in college. Year 2 was a suspension. Yeah.
Year 2 was a suspension. There was all these like off-field things. I remember the conversation going into year 2 was like the vibes have never been worse on a player, like ever. Like this guy's a massive bust, and he has a pretty subpar year 2, but it at least builds into that postseason where he winds up having a long touchdown run and not a long one, but a short touchdown reception in that loss to the Niners that I mentioned. It was his highest snap share of the season at 72%. I think it was his first game that year over 70%. My point is 2024 is the first time he ends up even being a full-time player, and that sort of progresses throughout the year. And then last year we see a step forward from there. You mentioned 3 games with 7+ receptions. He has 3 more with 6+ receptions. And that's why, the relevance of me saying that week 18 of 2025 was the first time he ever had 6 receptions in a game. In terms of the volume building, this is a unique player that there was some stuff with the playing time and all of that needed to get sorted as well. A huge part of my point is we're going into a new year where he's clearly established as one of the weapons. And they also don't have Khalif Raymond. They also don't have David Montgomery. Like, part of my take there was, as you know, but there was... They've gotten rid of a lot of the secondary players at the skill positions, and they signed a bunch of dudes to 1-year deals under $2 million. All of Isaiah Pacheco, Tyler Conklin, Cedric Wilson, Greg Dortch, all of them signed 1-year deals under $2 million. And that's how the Lions address their depth issues at running back, receiver, and tight end this offseason, because they don't have any money. And the reason they don't have any money is they drafted so well between 2021 and 2023, and they've had to give all these guys extensions. And they need to save money because they haven't extended Gibbs yet, and they haven't extended some other people. That's why they're not doing multi-year deals. These extensions are going to hit down the line. Amon-Ra's already signed his. Jameson signed his. They paid him a bunch of money. LaPorta's will be coming, and Gibbs's will be coming, but some of the defender, Penei Sewell signed his, and Aiden Hutchinson, and Jack Campbell, the linebacker, and they drafted so well. They have a ton of these dudes that are coming up in this window that it started a couple summers ago for these second contracts. And my take is they have to really lean on those guys and really concentrate at this stage of their multi-year team building process, because they don't have money to build a deep skill position group. That's why they're only signing guys that no one else wants. I mean, if you're really into Isaiah Pacheco this year, you have to acknowledge that nobody else wanted to sign him for more than 1 year, $1.8 million. That's not great. It seems like fantasy people probably think Isaiah Pacheco is better than he actually is, or the NFL thinks. He was a round 7 pick. He had a couple decent years and then got hurt and then hasn't really done anything. And anyway, so I'm really high on Gibbs too. I'm really high on. I think Amon-Ra is going to be great, and I think Jameson Williams. I think our disagreement really comes down to LaPorta's health, and I hadn't seen that stuff this week. I am broadly in my multi-year play of fantasy football, I'm becoming more and more wary of ignoring injury. There's this whole thing of guys returning that I've been tracking the last couple of years under this guise of a Mike Tomlin quote of "It's hard to board to board a moving train." Yeah, and as I've tracked that the last couple of years as it relates to people acquired by trade and things like that, one of the big ones has been guys that get hurt in the preseason, and then when they come back, they're not up to speed as we always talk about when they're going to be back. They'll be back in week 4. This guy got hurt, but at least he'll be back by week 4.
That's why it's important to me that he's expected to be full practice from day 1 at training camp.
That's great.
If that was not the case, I'd be backpedaling a lot. But I think this gives him a pretty good runway.
Yeah, and so maybe we're just disagreeing on LaPorta. I don't really want any on LaPorta, because I think he could have a good year, but I do think, especially at tight end, and he's been squeezed sometimes in this iteration of the offense. He was in 2024 pretty meaningfully. He wasn't early in 2025. But the way I'm looking at it is over the last 2 years, you have Jameson dominating LaPorta for a full season, pretty much. Then LaPorta dominating Jameson for a few weeks, and then LaPorta's out, and so Jameson plays without him. But Jameson has the best stretch of his career during that time, and shows that even if, in addition, when Amon-Ra's also out, he's capable of being a legit number 1 and having a really strong stretch. Again, it's a 10-game stretch where he was on a 1,400-yard pace. That's not a small back end of the season only. I've also said the 6-game stretch at the end where he had 8+ targets 5 times, but you stretch that to the 10 games, and he still had many other strong games, in that post-bye window when LaPorta was injured. Anyway, I think it's a fascinating discussion for sure.
Yeah, I think that one's an interesting one that we could probably go back and forth on all day. But in the spirit of trying to maintain this as a shortish view.
Yeah, the short view. We started with one.
I'm gonna get to one more. Maybe I'll save. I had 4 on my sheet. Maybe we'll save a couple of them for a later show or something.
We'll do them quick. Let's do the other ones quick.
All right. I don't have any faith in us to do that. We're going to do one for sure and maybe more, especially because one of them I think we'll talk about some of the guys today anyhow. But I want to talk about the Chiefs passing game because you're not the only person that I've had this disagreement with. I've, as you know, obviously podcast frequently with Davis and with Pat, and they've been both very in on Patrick Mahomes specifically, but probably more importantly for our conversation is the wide receivers in that offense. You've been like meaningfully higher than I have been on Xavier Worthy for basically like prior to him even playing a game in the NFL. So that's probably a prior's difference. I remember us like arguing about whether to take him in like a dynasty rookie draft of a team that we co-manage. And then Rice, I've been pretty high on at times in his career. But that has shifted for me toward the end of last season in a pretty large degree. And the big reason for that is I just stopped seeing their offense work. Like I've always felt like he was a little bit of like a guy where I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I think if you look at how he scores relative to how other wide receivers score, I just don't think that he is as good as those other wide receivers that he scores similarly to. Now, people have made that same case for like one of the guys we just talked about, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I think he has clearly refuted that case. I don't buy that Rice is as good as that. I think he's a bit more of a limited use player. Like as a yak player, as a finding holes in zones player, I think he's great, obviously. But there's been like multiple moments where, you know, I feel like I need him to play the ball better on some contested spots. He's never been a guy who's particularly gets vertical down the field. Never been a guy who's consistently being able to beat man press coverage. And I felt like early in his career, you know, nobody knew who he was. He was running a lot of these shorter routes. It was working to run the offense through him. He comes back last year. He picked up right where he left off. I mean, we had him on a team that we shared together, and it was really exciting just watching him like kind of cosplay peak Michael Thomas with 13 targets every week. And then toward the end of the season, like even before Patrick Mahomes got hurt, the offense just kind of stopped working. And I felt like watching week to week, defenses were just sitting on the Rice route tree and forcing those into a lot more incompletions. I had hoped going into this season, if I wanted to be in on the Chiefs, that they would add a more dynamic receiving weapon that could open this up. Because Kelsey's not what he used to be, obviously. Rice, I think, has serious limitations. I agree with you that the book is nowhere near closed on Xavier Worthy. I'm not writing him off as a bust, but I don't know how you can go into a season that you want to be a Super Bowl contender, like relying on him. Like he obviously has a lot of question marks surrounding him as a player. So I'm like, how is this passing game just going to go out and beat dudes? And because of that, like, the only guy I'm really optimistic on in this offense is Ken Walker. Because to me, if I'm looking at how does this offense sustain itself, it's like we got to stop being like leading the league in PROE. And we got to get under center a little bit more. We got to run the ball a little bit more and maybe force defenses to respect us so we can open up some space. I think maybe we see that part similarly, but I really struggle to get in on Rice at ADP. I'm a bit open-minded to Worthy at ADP. There's other guys that go near him I like more, like a Downs. I'm more into Pearsall. I'm open-minded on those guys and where you're at on the state of the Chiefs receivers.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one. I mean, we're joking that the short view is going long. It's a dead part of the season. The idea of the short view is, you know, when there's a lot going on.
And there will be very soon. We're getting into camp.
There will be very soon.
We're going to do quick hitters. It's just like there's no news. Like to the degree there's no news we were talking about the other day where it's like a guy who's a beat writer on the Vikings got asked to make a prediction about the running back room based on no particular inside info, gave like a take the same way that like I would give a take or you would give a take, and it got aggregated and it flipped Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason's ADPs by like a round and a half. It's like that's how little.
What was the take?
Oh, just like he was like, I think Jordan Mason's going to be the lead back this year. But it's not like he was like, I've been observing OTAs and like Jordan Mason is running with the ones. Like it wasn't anything like that. It was just like, my opinion is Jordan Mason will be the one this year. And everyone was like remove like these ADPs are completely crossed.
Yeah, it's just confirmation bias.
Right,
I already thought that, so now I'm certain that I'm right about it now that you told me that. It's great.
But
so my question about the KC thing is, I mean, I think this is fairly easy. I don't think I need to go into a whole thing about Worthy and Rice and everything. It's, do you think they're going to be a lot worse than their current market implied scoring, like using look-ahead lines, future spreads, and point totals? They're expected to be the 11th highest scoring team in the NFL. Do you think they're not going to be that good of an offense? It sounds like you think they're going to be a below-average offense, which is I don't think is a bad take at all.
I mean, 11 is like 11 is kind of low. Like that's like that because that's giving them a lot of credit. Like I think they're going to be an average offense, but I think they're going to be I'd say they're going to.
So
be
who's
going to
score?
Offense.
Because you're out on Kelsey, you're out on Rice and Worthy. I think Tyquan Thornton had 19 receptions last year.
I think Rice will be fine, but I don't love him at ADP at the 2-3 turn. I think I like him fine, but like I feel better about Smith. I feel better about Pickens. Would be the two main names I'd throw out at the same position as him that you can usually get behind him. Worthy, I feel
I would never take those two guys over Rice personally.
Okay. Yeah.
After going through the projections, maybe Pickens, Devonta Smith worried me when I went through the projections.
Okay, maybe we'll get back to him another day because I've been pretty in on him, but Worthy is like just a question mark to me. Like I think he's a reasonably well priced bet where he's going in ADP. I haven't really been fading him,
but if he's
he's
bad.
But that's like
I don't want to be in on him. I think he has like serious limitations. I don't want to be the donkey who's just overly in on Worthy and over. But just as far as like having done the projections and to sort of answer,
my point is if Worthy is bad, I do think they're a below average offense because I feel like I know what Rice is, and I feel like he needs like if that's just what the offense is, it's like we're gonna throw 12 routes to Rashee Rice at an 8 out of 6 like every single week. Like I just think defenses are either fine with that, in which case, like I guess he could probably score a lot of kind of fantasy points, or they're going to take it away. And I think that last year they started to take it away because they realized like we might as well take this away because what else are we afraid of? And like not much. And like I think they need Worthy to be a hit. I think it's kind of irresponsible how much they're relying on Worthy to be a hit this season. And then the one guy who I do think really scores is Walker. Like I'm very in on him.
Yeah,
I think we're going to see a pretty big shift in their PROE this year.
And if Walker runs as effectively as we think, I do think it's going to. Well, I mean, we may see a big shift in their PROE. They've been top 2 in the league every single year of Mahomes' career. Yeah. So even if they shift, there's a long way between that and even league average.
Totally.
If Walker is a really good runner. And that's more than just a Mahomes thing. That's an Andy Reid thing. That's gone back to the Eagles days. Like they used to throw. I didn't study PROE back then, but they used to throw more than offenses back in that era. And they used their running back in the passing game, Brian Westbrook back then, and all that stuff. But if Walker is the player that we both think he's going to be, I think it's a very positive thing for the pass game. I wrote in my my KC projections. Well, I do the projection, and then I write the off-season stealing signals write-ups from the stuff that I learned from the projections. And in my KC write-up, I was talking about how Mahomes, I projected him for counterintuitively projected him for better efficiency coming off injury, passing efficiency than he's had in recent years. And part of that's because of the volume dropping, because I do expect them to drop back a little less, and that naturally is a positive to per attempt efficiency. Part of it is either Ken Walker's going to have 1,500 yards rushing because teams aren't going to be willing to bring guys down into the box, which they've never really done. There's always been room to run for KC runners, or he's going to be good enough that defenses are finally going to have to consider how to play the Chiefs' offense a little bit differently. I think if you have a dynamic running back like him in the offense, it really does open things up for a guy like a Xavier Worthy, for example, and I think it does open up for Rashee Rice. You're, I think, thinking about it like they needed a dynamic receiver. I think having a dynamic runner in the backfield does do that a little bit in the modern schemes, even though we've always talked about running backs not mattering that much. I think you see differently in some places.
I think they needed both, but I think Walker helps a lot. He might help them more as an offense in real life than he helps. Like, I could see how he helps Worthy more, but like, I don't know if I'm in love with the idea of Rashee. Like, what did you have their PROE at when you did your projections that Rice still came out so favorably? Because I guess that's the thing. That's like, if they actually don't become that throw heavy, then can you get to the volume on Rice? Because Rice is like so volume dependent. Like I don't think we can project a ton of.
Well, I have his target share at 25.5%. Which is not
reasonable.
like it's been a lot higher, right?
That's
Before
reasonable.
Tyquan Thornton is their number 3. Again, he had 19 catches last year. I think he had like 38 targets. I think Jalen Royals is really interesting. Like I've been asking you these questions
Allen
about like
is a little interesting.
Okay, I'm not that into the Cyrus Allen or Jeff Caldwell because they played with Sorsby and neither of them really did anything. And Sorsby is supposed to be a guy that, even with gambling stuff, was going to get.
When I say a little interesting, like I mean a little interesting.
A little, yeah.
Like,
he was like a
emphasis on little interesting. Like
late day 3 pick rookie. Like they haven't even been able to use their first round rookies in recent years.
Yeah.
The Chiefs. I'm a little out on that. I see the running backs. Especially Ken Walker, obviously, but even the potential for Emma Johnson to be interesting or whatever.
Johnson.
I see the running backs as being good, and then I think Kelsey's still going to be, but like
the
my
running
Kelsey
back target
projection,
share, I think could increase a lot this year because I think Walker they're going to want to throw to way more than they wanted to throw to Checo and Hunt. I just think he's so much more dynamic in the open field, and then if they can get a little bit more, I don't even know if Rashard Smith will be on the team, but I feel like one of the running backs like. DeMercado's a pass downs back. He might be there too. I hope Johnson elevates there too. He's one of the best pass catching backs in the class. He's a guy that you use in that capacity. And then if Smith is still a part of it, they might use him. I would think the running back target share comes up a lot. But I agree with you. Like, yeah, Worthy, huge question mark. Kelsey, half washed. And yeah, Tyquan is like.
It sounds to me like you need to go bet the under or the opposite side of the Chiefs spread on all the look ahead lines you can get.
That is kind of a plan, for sure.
So what else do we got on the long view stuff? Or the short view stuff.
The short view. Let's do one more because I think we're going to talk about the other guy maybe in the rest of the show. So the one is the Steelers backfield. I wanted to get a hit on. This is like one where like you have the home field advantage here because you actually got into the spreadsheet and like projected it out, and it's very possible that if I did that, I would come away with a similar conclusion. My intuition.
Let me cut you off before you change that. Because you asked me a direct question. I was at plus 3.5% on the PROE. I just answered the target share on Rashee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm going to bet the under on that. Hard.
They were 3.9 last year, 5.8 or higher every other year. So I'm lower than they've ever been.
I think Walker's going to be a massive difference maker in how they approach things, and I think Bieniemy is going to come in and be a little different. Like I think that they will have to. It would be my suggestion. Like I think if they can't, I don't think it's sustainable to be a plus 4 PRE offense with the pass game weapons that they have, especially with Mahomes coming off an ACL. I feel like I get if you're doing a projection, you should be like mindful and responsible of historical stuff. But if I'm just going to have like a take that's not like, trying to maybe like hit the right median, my take would be that they will be closer to 0 than they've ever been.
To 0. That's a huge shift. So working back 3.9% last year, but 5.8%, 7.4%, 10.8%, which is 2022. That's the last time Bieniemy was a coordinator when they had 10.8%. And that's like, no one does that anymore. No one's even close to that.
When they passed that much. Like last year was the first year that they like looked well, and a little bit in 2024 as well.
Everyone was actually hammering Patrick Mahomes per attempt efficiency during those eras. Like that he was way worse.
So like, I mean, maybe this is like a feel thing. But like I felt like prior to last year and in times in 2024, but especially last year, I felt like even if the numbers said that the per pass efficiency was lower, and I've heard you talk about this, like I felt like they were passing so much and they were kind of managing the game underneath in a way that it still looked like an efficient operation on a play-to-play basis. Like if I was betting money on the Chiefs, I generally felt confident that like they were going to find ways to score. Last year was the first year where I felt like their offense just looked like just totally uninspiring.
It looked bad. Andy Reid looked old. I was on Stealing Bananas with Siegel. I was talking about it every Sunday. I was like, dude, he needs to retire. It looked bad. I agree. I generally defer to the market on this stuff with my projections, and that's why my initial response to you was, do you think they're going to come in lower than 11th? And I don't even think it's a bad take because I agree with the idea that they looked really bad last year, and Andy Reid looked washed as a coach. If that's your take, then I respect it. But if you think that they're going to be, and then I think the 0 PROE is
closer to 0. Like if I was doing it, I'd probably put them at like 1 to 2, maybe 1.5.
I think they'll start that way because Mahomes is ACL. And I think they'll be run heavy early in the year. I think they'll be closer to 0 early in the year. I think they will finish +3 or something. Maybe I'm a little too high at +3.5. But I think they're going to lean toward the pass because I think that's that's the way they've always run it. That's Mahomes.
The one thing I'd say for context on this is like when I say – so like I threw out 1.5 as a number. Like that's still not run heavy. It'd be really run heavy for the Chiefs. But like last year, the Jaguars were 6th in the NFL in PRO with a 1.6. So like even at 1.5, they're still one of the most pass heavy teams in the league. To be clear, people don't know how to put these numbers in context.
Right. That's when I was saying how it's been coming down for the Chiefs and saying they had been at like +10 something and they got all the way down to +3.9% last year. But I also gave the stat that they've been top 2 every year of Mahomes' career. So even though that's been dropping way down towards 0, they were second if you include the postseason. When I did the ETR pod, I think Jack said that they were first. So maybe I'm not including the postseason and they are. I don't know which one of us is. Well,
they didn't make the postseason
or like slightly different models.
So.
Right, but the other team might have. I don't know who the other team even was.
I don't think so because it would have been the Cardinals last year that were tied with them.
Was it the Cardinals?
I have Cardinals 1 and Chiefs 2. So
Chiefs 2, right? So they must have had a slightly different model or something.
Yeah.
That's what I have as the Cardinals 1 as well. Anyway, I do like your point that in my projections I'm probably +3.5%. I thought I was bringing it down.
I think it's a completely
maybe I would have brought it down
to
more.
put in a projection. And like I've heard you talk on the projection shows, like another spot where I didn't put on the show sheet because I think we massively agree was like I remember you were talking about the Broncos and you were like, I think this offense is really underrated by the market, but I had to bring down my touchdown expectation to kind of make it conform with the market. And if I was doing projections for 32 teams, I think that's the right attitude to have, right? You don't want to just be constantly betting against the market over and over and over again. But if I'm like diving in, like what I already talked, I'd be like, no, I think you're right. The market's wrong. I think the Broncos are a lot better than the market
for sure
thinks that they are. So,
but that's the way that I play the actual drafts and rankings and all of those things. But so it's just to zero in on the projection thing because you said the 25.5% thing was reasonable. Even if I bring Casey's pass rate down to, let's do +2%. Like I still wind up with Rashee Rice at a 25.5% target share ahead of Drake London, ahead of Nico Collins, ahead of George Pickens,
wow,
and meaningfully ahead of Devonta Smith.
What's the yard target you have on him?
7.8. I have all those guys at least 8.4. Maybe I have too many TDs for him, but again, they're projected to be the 11th highest scoring offense, and he has been a pretty effective TD score for them. So, anyway, that's an interesting one for sure. I like your perspective.
Where I do think that the median on him, like I don't know how to phrase this best. I feel like he's a player who like the median projection for him is very high, but it's a fragile median because I feel like a lot of his production is kind of at the whims of how they choose to run their offense. And like I do think there's fragility to his profile where
the way I've been talking about him
go south like in a hurry. And I don't think it's probably happening this year in his career, but I do think if I was to guess at the trajectory of his career, I don't know when this will be, but I do kind of think it's going to just like at one point just like the bottom's going to fall out. Because I feel like if they found a more well-rounded answer than him, he could get de-emphasized like in a hurry. I've gotten more warm to him since they didn't add anyone because I remember in the pre-draft process being like, if they draft like Jordan Tyson, I want kind of nothing to do with this Rashee Rice situation. But
I think this is a big part of the disagreement. This is one of the things I'm really excited to dig in with you on because you're a lot more engaged in best ball all year round and everything, and I am not as engaged in the winter these days, and then a lot more once I go through the projections. But part of that, I've told you, I really like being disengaged because I like coming in later because I would have absolutely felt the same way about Rice the whole early part of the offseason, especially with all the off-field stuff. He went to jail because he broke his probation and all that. But the fact is, it's late July, And what I'm trying to tell you is if you go through a projection, you got to figure out where you're getting these targets from because it's still Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, and like Jalen Royals. They don't have other receivers. Tyquan Thornton is a deep threat only. He played 70+% of the snaps just the first few weeks, and then he was in a very bit role. That is Justin Watson territory, what he did the rest of the year. People remember him as more than he was because he had a really high rate of plays down the field, and he was good. Tyquan Thornton was good, don't get me wrong. And maybe his role expands. I don't know. But I'm just trying to emphasize what it was last year because I think we romanticized the explosive play rate. I don't think it will
It was just like he came down with like 3 deep passes, and it was the first time someone's seen a successful deep pass for the Chiefs in 2 years. And so people were like, oh my God, they finally found the guy who could do it, and he didn't do anything else. He had 19
catches on the season. It's slightly more than 1 per game. And again, his usage was at its highest in the very beginning, the first few weeks when Xavier Worthy got hurt in week 1 and the next couple games that he missed. And by the time Worthy was back, Tyquan Thornton's was, I think, his snap share dropped to where I think he was never over 50% again, or I don't have the stat right in front of me. And Worthy was playing hurt, but they were still like, yeah, I mean, Tyquan Thornton's this limited rotational player. They're only doing little stuff with him. So this is a take, I think, where I think I would agree with everything you were saying earlier in the offseason. I guess I would challenge you on, do you feel like you have a little bit of take lock on it? Because if you're not, I'm afraid that I'm going to be too high on Rice because I actually came out of this like I want to do the post-hype bet that I didn't make a lot of last year, but the Rice profile can consolidate volume. We agreed on this last year. He could have a 30% target share.
Yeah.
I'm projecting 25.5%. What about that side of it? They have no one. What if Worthy's bad? Rashee Rice could get fed, dude. I agree with you. He would be worse on 31 other teams.
I think he could get fed, but I think the scenarios, if that's the scenario for the offense, then I definitely think they're going to be worse than 11th by a lot. I think that the amount. I think Rashee Rice is can meet in a recession. Like the more demand there is for Rashee Rice, I think it says bad things about the offense at this point. I think a functional offense is not giving him a 30% target share. And that
we had this whole discussion last year when you talked me into taking Rashee Rice on our main event team. Like you were still willing to play that for volume reasons because it's fantasy football. And I guess I'm wondering why that changed so much. Like, because I think that bet works again this year.
Yeah, I mean, partially it's the price because last year was cheaper for good reason because he was missing games. And also I think that I don't think we'd really seen the chickens come home to roost yet. And I think there's like a lag effect to this where he initially in his career, maybe it's just defenses were playing him differently. Despite this really weird role, he was actually really efficient. And it wasn't until like the second half of last season where not just his efficiency, but like the offense's efficiency started to drop while being very reliant on him. And so I wonder if like, is there a feedback loop where it goes, hey, we found something in Rice. This is great. We're emphasizing him a ton. As teams expect him to be emphasized a ton, they actually start to take him away a little bit more. And is the next evolution for the Chiefs being like, hey, we got to stop doing this Rashee Rice stuff. Like we got to dial it back. And I don't know. That's what my intuition is that they should do. But to your point, which is a good one, I don't know where else it goes unless Worthy shows himself to be very different than he was the first 2 years, or I should say at least last year.
Yeah,
he did have some
if you're out on Rice,
half of year 1, like that's why I'm open to Worthy because and it's actually very frustrating because almost every year of his career so far, for some reason or another, I've wound up like drafting a decent chunk of this player.
I know I didn't want to take him a lot this year either, but I'm the same way.
But like I don't really believe in Xavier Worthy. I didn't even really believe in him as a prospect, but I do feel like I think it would be irresponsible to write him off. And I do think that like someone probably has to be an answer, like unless they just actively suck, which I don't expect. Like it's not going to be like a bottom 5 offense. And then someone does kind of have to step up. And I do think Worthy will at the very least have an opportunity to do that. I don't know if he's like capable, but I don't see any reason on this offense why he wouldn't have an opportunity this year if he's fully healthy to prove what he can do, which keeps me like interested in him despite not really believing in him. But one
other thing I'll note about the pass rate stuff in my overall, so because you kind of ran this outline by me a little bit and asked me if I wanted to chat about the Chiefs passing offense, and I was like, I mean, yeah, let's just get into it. But I came out pretty low on Patrick Mahomes. I thought I was going to come out hotter on him too. But again, this gets back to that point of like,
even while being low on Mahomes, that's something that
that's right.
Yeah.
It's weird to me. And I'm high on Worthy. And I was too high on Kelsey. Higher than I want to be on Kelsey. I'm asking you, I probably sound combative to some of the listeners who don't know some of our history, like with the shared history of drafting Rashee Rice together last year. I'm genuinely trying to understand what happens with the Chiefs season, because I don't like to do a projection and be like, oh, because of vacated targets, I'm on this guy, right?
Right.
But like, what happens to their season? How are they 11th in scoring? And I do think Patrick Mahomes is still good enough. When he went down last year, this offense was still running above average play volume.
He'll keep things
they were still
afloat. Like he'll at least he
can
single-handedly drag you to like base competence, unless he's just
another
really
reason
bad
I was
injury,
at
but I don't
right. To this point, another reason why I was at plus 3.5%, they fell to plus 3.9% because they played several games without him last yee. I don't know what his PROE is off the top before the Mahomes injury, but I'm like 99.9% certain it fell because their volume, they ran 43 and 42 plays a couple of the games.
Their run game was so unserious last year. Like
their worst. Okay, so I pulled up their weekly numbers. Week 18. Week 17 was their lowest PROE of the year without Mahomes, minus 8.5%. Week 18 was minus 4.9%. Week 16 was plus 2.7, which is still below their seasonal average. When Mahomes was playing, starting in week 1, plus 9.6, plus 4.4, plus 5.1, plus 4.3, plus 15.4, plus 9.3, minus 3.2, plus 8.8, minus 4.9, plus 17.4. And then there's a couple that are close to neutral, and he goes out somewhere around there. But like every week you're talking about, I mean, there's a couple that get low, but every week you're talking about 5 or higher, 9, 15, 17 in a league where people weren't doing that. They wind up at plus 3.9 because they had a minus 8.5 and a minus 4.8 or 4.9 after he was gone. I don't know. I think the 3.5 is probably right. I actually probably think I would want to put that back. And so there's this question of, I think Rashee Rice, like last year people were like, one of the things you said to me last year was like, it felt like he was a locked in first round receiver that we were getting at a huge discount when he came back. I think that's what you're getting at the 2-3 turn this year, is some like a profile that could be viewed that way, as long as the off field stuff all checks out. I mean, we got to get all that figured out. Or as you said, we got to be in on Xavier Worthy, dude. We got to be drafting a lot of Xavier Worthy.
Well, that doesn't sound particularly appetizing. All right, we're 52 minutes in. I'm making executive decision.
What was the other one? Steelers backfield?
No more short view today. We'll get there. It was a medium view at the shortest. I
want to hear. No, you got to give the listeners. No, Jacob, I cut you off. You told me you had a take about
the
pass volume to the running backs for the Steelers.
I'm putting the clock on us. I'm a little bit curious because I don't have the spreadsheet up with my projection. So my intuition going into this offseason was that last year's Steelers were a little bit of a mirage from like a backfield XFP perspective, where an XFP, by that I mean expected fantasy points, in terms of like just it was flowing for everybody. Like somehow Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell, when they were both healthy, they were like both genuinely playable as RB2s frequently last season. And a huge part of that was just how much volume there was in the passing game. And I thought this was like kind of predictable going in. I certainly did not predict that Kenny Gainwell would be as big of a part of it, but I did think it was a backfield that was going to be pretty valuable overall because Aaron Rodgers throws a lot to the backs historically. They had unbelievably bad receiver depth last year on that team, where it was DK Metcalf, who's not traditionally a short area target. He actually did more short area stuff last year than he'd ever done and was decently successful at it, but that's not really what you think of him doing. And so all the targets kind of just had to go running backs, tight ends, and a lot of it was these backs, which was an area of strength they found. Arthur Smith also, like historically, been high XFP backfields, both in the run game especially. Now you bring in Mike McCarthy, a little bit more of a traditional offense. They add Michael Pittman, who's a volume consolidator. They draft Jeremy Bernard, who I don't know if I love Jeremy Bernard, but I would reckon he's probably a lot better than like Roman Wilson or Scotty Miller or any of these goofs that they were playing last year as their wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. I don't know that I've been expecting to see like a pretty substantial drop in the total backfield targets available, to the point that I've struggled a little bit with their prices, because I felt like the market has been largely pricing in that the backfield, the total pie is going to be similar to last year, and then we just have to guess how to divide up that pie. I feel like I more or less agree with you on the take you gave on ETR and how to divide up the pie. I'm a little bit more in on Warren than Dowdle. I definitely think it'll be a split, and I think it's there's some uncertainty there. But the total pie of receiving, you still had as being really, really strong. I see a pretty steep decline in the rush rate, and I see a reasonable decline in the running back portion of the target share as these other receivers get in there. But hearing you out made me maybe more interested in the Pittsburgh backs and potentially rethinking things. So was curious your take on that.
No, I think it's a good breakdown. It's a good secondary perspective. People have heard probably my take from that podcast. I'll give a couple stats that I gave there, which is that there were 6 backs last year that had 85 plus targets. It was the first time since 2019 we had that many with that much volume. Running back receiving's been down for years. And there was only one more over 60. So between 60 and 85, Ashton Ginty was in there. The 6 backs that had 85 plus was like Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson. Chase Brown is one of them. Devon Achane is the 5th. And then Kenny Gainwell. And in addition to Kenny Gainwell having 45, Kenny Gainwell having 85, and the 8th highest back being whatever it was, 60 or below 60 or something, Jaylen Warren had 45. I mean, he's close to the back end of the top 10 in running backs, and he's the clear second. He had half as many as Gainwell. Gainwell had 85. Warren had 45. They had 132 as a team. Those two ate up most of them. They had 130. Gainwell's gone. 85 targets left behind. You described something that I think is really interesting. I think my response would still be that the running back volume could come down a lot and still be relevant. I had both of them at 62. When I'm listening to you, I'm like, maybe I'm too high to have them combined for
target share there for the running backs. What's the total running back target share you have
this year, or that I'm projecting last year?
Well, both is fine. I meant that you're projecting this year, but both is probably an interesting way of putting it.
Oh, I was projecting 24.5%. They were actually at 24.0% last year. So I'm projecting a little bit of an increase, but to be fair, I have 15 targets for Eli Heidenreich, who might not even make the team. I guess I didn't know how to use him because they're like, he's a wide receiver / running back. Those 15 targets could go away, and then you'd be talking about a very different, if I take those away, it's 21.9% for the other two, which, again, last year, the two main guys had 130 out of 132 for the running backs.
Right.
Like Caleb Johnson wasn't really involved at all in the pass game. So it's a question of, to me, I feel like I'm scaling back a little bit. Maybe I need to scale back more, but my point is I have them both over 60 targets as a scaled back. And then the other part of the question or counter for me would be that it's an Aaron Rodgers thing, because he's been throwing to his backs at a high rate since Aaron Jones, since A.J. Dillon. He did it with both Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. When Braylon Allen was a rookie, we're catching a bunch of balls. When Rodgers was operating that Jets offense and in there, I can't remember exactly how that looked or what. I don't have all of Aaron Rodgers' running back target shares in front of me, but that was a stat I remember from my early days of doing fantasy, that Rodgers' running backs always scored well. And a big part of it was the high-value touch stuff that I used to write about in different ways, which is receiving and goal line work. His offenses always created touchdown chances, and he always threw to them. Even when he had big backs.
And
when he had Eddie Lacy back there.
He throws, not just does he throw to them a lot, but he actually generates post-target efficiency out of his running backs, because he sees the field so well that he's usually getting it out to them in a way that they can actually run after the catch, which is part of the fun with him too.
That's right. And he's very accurate. He leads them into space. He knows how to, Rodgers, for all of his, warts and everything, is able to throw the ball accurately, and especially still at this point of his career, to the short area of the field. He maybe can't as well, drive the ball down the field and all these things, but if he sees that you're in some type of a coverage that adds extra defensive backs into more of a shell coverage, and you're going over the top on Metcalf, he will quickly get the ball to his outlet and accurately, and they'll have room to catch and run. They both Warren and Gainwell last year had over an 80% catch rate, if I'm not mistaken. It might even have been 85%. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but very high catch rates, and to your point, efficiency after the catch as well. And so, it's a question. I was saying Eddie Lacy, Cedric Benson, some of these guys way back in Rodgers' earlier career that were like not big pass catchers until they played with Rodgers. And then suddenly it's like, oh, they're actually giving you some PPR value. So I've always had this take on Rodgers that his backs are pretty good. And as he's aged, I've felt more strongly about it because he's more willing to take the short throws. That's something he's been hammered for, is that his ADOT has been too low. They were talking about it all last year. For like 6 weeks, they didn't complete a pass more than 20 yards downfield. And it was this big storyline. They have not completed something more than 20 air yards. So the idea, I was curious if you had some like significant reason other than some of the acquisitions, is just sort of how you talk through it. I think it's a good case.
Twofold. The one case is the McCarthy versus Smith, where just Smith gets so weird with some of the personnel stuff that there's just a lot of running backs on the field, and there's a lot of like non-pass catching entities on the field, where it leads to more consolidation on the wide receiver one and the running backs, because you have a bunch of like goofy tight ends on the field all the time who don't even run a route. And I'm projecting like a lot more 11 this year in a Mike McCarthy offense. And the biggest thing is just the acquisition. Like I think Pittman, look, I watch a lot of Michael Pittman. I don't consider him a particularly inspiring football player. I consider him a pretty mid football player in a lot of respects, but he has largely been like a walking 23% target share for his career.
I love it.
And like in particular, he is that at a pretty low ADOT. And so I do think some of the short area targets that are going to Gainwell and Warren last year, those kind of go to Pittman. And then Bernard is another ball in hand kind of gadgety guy who could, I think, see some rushing work, could see some screens.
So he's the one that I would probably push back on. I love the Pittman take, and I'm higher than market on Pittman and Metcalf, and I'm going to rank them higher than their ADPs. I think both of them, because Metcalf had his career low ADOT last year, which gets back to the Rodgers thing. But Bernard, the 11 personnel thing I wanted to ask about, are you just saying relative to last year, like you think the rate's going to change because it was really high last year?
It has to change relative to last year because it was ridiculous. And they had one NFL quality wide receiver on their roster last year. But,
right.
I would guess
because you got Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah.
I think you're going to get those two guys out there, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would. I don't know. I don't have like all the 32 teams that I would put it, but I would guess that they would be somewhere between roughly in the middle of the pack in 12 personnel usage this year.
Which is fine. Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I don't think that
last year they would have been like, I don't have it in front of me, but if they weren't top 5 in 12 or 13 personnel usage last year, I'd be stunned. I mean, they must have been. Right?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me either, but I think to that point, if they're only in 11 half the time. Or not half the time, sorry. They're middle of the pack in 11 because they're middle of the pack in 12 and 13 stuff combined, like you were saying. Then I don't think Jeremy Bernard's that big of a threat to the running backs, basically. Like I think I actually wrote up Jeremy Bernard as a guy I didn't really like because he has two clear veterans in front of him, and I just think there's basically zero. And then like profile-wise, he's a smaller receiver. There's zero chance he plays in two receiver sets without an injury. Like it's going to be Metcalf and Pittman no matter what. And then even if they're just like league average in 11 personnel usage, Bernard's going to lose routes. Like even if he's good, it's got to be a rookie year where he's sort of, and then on top of that, Rodgers basically hates every rookie. Like everyone, as soon as you make one mistake, he banishes you to the shadow realm. So he's got other things working against him. I mean, I think we can lean into rookie uncertainty always, and I'm very into that. But with Jeremy Bernard, it's like, I'm still willing to look at some of the context around some of the things that I think are knowns relative to the rookie uncertainty, and the things that are knowns are that his teammates and both the receivers ahead of him and the tight ends, and the reason that they'd be even mid-pack in 12. I mean, so I have 7.5% target share for Jeremy Bernard. That's very low for a wide receiver 3 for me.
Over there.
I mean, probably would take the over too, to be honest. But I have it that
7.5. That's essentially saying like even if he runs 50% routes, which I think I would take a slight over on, that puts him at a 15% targets per route run on 50% routes. That feels a little bearish.
But that's like the lowest. My point in saying that was that's like the lowest wide receiver 3 target share I probably have in the league, because Pittman and Metcalf are both going to earn volume, and I do have a reasonable tight end 2 target share because I do think they're going to run. Like Darnell Washington's going to get some targets.
So last year they ran a rate of 11 personnel on only 38.6% of plays. That's almost 20 percentage points below the league average. I don't know if that puts them in dead last or not, but I'm sure it's close. I would guess that comes up closer to league average. They also had a 70 2% pass rate out of 11 personnel, which is not that shocking. Most teams have a pretty high pass rate out of 11 personnel. So I could see a scenario where they come up closer. Like the league average rate of 11 personnel usage is 56. Let's even say they're a little bit below that, but way less extreme. They're like 50, and they still have that 70% pass rate, which would be a little lower last year. That gets Jeremy Bernard on the field for like a roughly 60% route share. Or at least could. I'm not saying he's going to have 100% of the 11 personnel routes, obviously. But like I do think a third wide receiver will be out there. I don't know if I would say that the Steelers will have the lowest wide receiver 3 target share. I mean, we just talked about the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs will have a lower wide receiver 3 target share than the Steelers.
I was waiting to tell you that look, anyone who's paying close attention, it's like, Ben, you just said you have 15 targets to Eli Heidenreich, and there was a report he's not making the team. So I had him at 2.6%. I've moved 1.5% off Eli Heidenreich over to Jeremy Bernard. Okay. I think that's fair. We'll get him to 9%. That's where it should have been, probably.
All right, that sounds
anyway,
good.
I like that we're doing some.
We did the short view.
Yeah,
took us over an
and
hour.
I'm editing my projections. It's great. This is fantastic. All right, let's get to the running back discussion.
Let's get this going. Yeah,
the state of the running back position. Why don't you go ahead? You pitch this idea. You lay it out.
So, I mean, we talked about this a lot in the Chiefs section of the podcast, the idea of falling pass rates over expectation. We noted their pass rate over expectation has been falling. Almost the entire league's pass rate over expectation has been falling. We talked about that a lot on the first episode, that teams defensively are orienting themselves around taking away explosives. And you talked about the different ways in that offenses have tried to navigate that. Some teams like that Bears and Falcons team you cited on the first episode went super extreme, but almost every team, or at least the vast aggregate of teams, are running the ball more and playing fewer wide receivers on the field. And so I think a big way that's impacted fantasy football has just been fewer receptions, fewer plays run per game, because teams are keeping the clock moving all the time because they're running the ball. And what we've seen is in 2023, a really successful zero RB year, some high profile wins from zero RB style teams. Since then, we've seen that rush rate come up across the league, and we've seen fantasy drafters have less success on a year-to-year basis on zero RB builds on aggregate, and more success on some running back heavy builds. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think the changes in personnel is probably the most plausibly sustainable reason for that. There are some super unsustainable reasons for that, such as just like we've been running ridiculously pure on running back health the last couple of years compared to wide receiver health. Long discussion of how this could go from here, but I think where we are right now is unequivocally running back prices are up over last year. They are up a lot over 2 years ago. I've written kind of a unintentionally annual article series about the running back economy year to year. And it's a privilege to talk about this subject with you because you wrote such a seminal article on the running back dead zone, what it actually means, what it actually does not mean, in ways that's different than how it's been interpreted over the years. And wanted to talk about some of the key ramifications of this running back inflation in drafts right now, how people are playing it, and how we should be playing it or should not be playing it.
So I love it. You've been doing a lot more drafting than I have up to this point, which, I mean, for people who don't know, maybe come to this pod from your side, I'm always pretty open about, but I live in a state where I can't do underdog freely, and it's a little trickier for me to get into some of the different stuff. And I found workarounds for a while, but a lot of that was, driving across the border to enter drafts and doing a lot of slow drafts, and I don't really like the slow drafts. And anyway, over time, I've just sort of been like, look, I'm a dad. I'm not going to, make such a massive issue of my life to just get into fantasy football drafts. I'll get my exposure when I get my exposure, which has meant for last year and then now this year, a little bit less drafting up to this point, but I'm starting to draft quite a bit more here in July. But anyway, I would trust anything you have to say about the market over me.
I'll give you
because you have a lot better of a feel for it.
I'll give you the easiest example. So I mean, if anyone wants to go check, I wrote an article even about this where I have like a bunch of charts that I won't put up on screen, but where you can see that running back inflation very visually. If I would say there was one player that like most signifies this change, and maybe this is where I'll start the conversation. To me, it's Javonte Williams, because one of the things that you wrote about really well, and please stop me if I'm mischaracterizing sort of any of the ways that you've put it, but you talked about, the archetypes of different dead zone profiles, and that the ones where we're paying for something we've already seen, but the market has decided we're not going to price it with a premium, right? We've seen proof of concept. We've seen the volume. Something crazy is going on outside of my place. Someone's honking a buzzer. Sorry about that. Where the market has seen it and they're not that impressed. So they're going to draft it, as an RB2 in round 3 or round 4. They're not going to do it in the first or second round.
Yep.
Javonte obviously strikes us as that kind of profile. What's been interesting, though, is in recent years, that kind of archetypal dead zone profile has remained priced in the dead zone, but has just been priced cheaper. I think of Joe Mixon in 2024 as an example of a guy that we'd obviously seen it before, not an efficiency-based bet, not really like a talent breakthrough-based bet, but he was a guy who probably, if we're just being honest, would have been taken in like round 3 at around the time that you wrote the CBS article. 2 years ago, he goes at the 5-6 turn, and it's like the degree of upside you need to beat a round 5-6 ADP, especially in a best ball context, which I think is very different than a redraft context, is just very different than what you need if you're going to pick 30. And so a lot of people kind of proclaimed the dead zone to be dead. We don't have to care about this anymore. Game's changed. But then because of that, it seems like we're now kind of back to some of these dead zone profiles going really high. So like Javonte Williams is gone all year, depending on where you play, late 3rd, maybe the very early 4th. And here's a guy who early in the season had, a little bit of a 3-down profile. He did have some interesting efficiency throughout the year. One of the big things with like classic dead zone profiles is a lack of receiving juice. I'm just going to read out Javonte Williams' receiving totals from starting the game that CeeDee Lamb came back from injury. And we have 1 catch, 2 yards, 1 catch, 8 yards, 1 catch, 0 yards, 1 catch, 0 yards, 2 catches, 14 yards, 3 for 21 on the touchdown, 2 catches, 0 yards, 0 catches, 0 yards, 2 catches, 9 yards, 0 catches, 0 yards. That is like the most dead zone profile I've ever seen. And like, he's a guy that's now going late 3rd, getting a ton of buzz. People really like him as a high touchdown expectation. To me, this is a guy that if we weren't kind of dealing with the trauma of like getting owned by fading some of these veteran running backs, there'd be more people willing to stand up and say like, you can't draft this in the 3rd round. But it feels like people are kind of reverting a little bit into ways that we drafted previously. Obviously, I'm spoiling my take, which is that I think he's a pretty bad pick this year. But I think he's indicative of a larger trend of these sort of dead zone backs losing the fear around them. And I'm curious to see if you think that's reasonable because of some of these macro trends, or if it's an overreaction.
No, I think I'm glad to have you break it down. Part of the reason I was excited to just go a little longer on the short view is there's obviously more to it, and we're going to be able to talk about it. But I guess I think it's really straightforward. I think it's really straightforward that he's a bad pick, that people are overreacting to how healthy running backs have started or have been the last couple of years, as you just detailed, and have been lulled to a false sense of security. I think there's probably a layer here that argues that, or that somebody could argue that this has a lot to do with best ball and sort of format, and it's half PPR on underdog. Although I pull up FFPC and he's going in the same spot. I mean, he's going RB17 right at the 3-4 turn on FFPC, which has tight end premium and has more tight ends going ahead of him. I mean, he must be going comparatively even a little bit higher over there, actually. We know FFPC drafters have always liked their boomer backs. The way that I'm looking at this, as you mentioned, I think you detailed what I thought was sort of the overarching traits of dead zone backs well, in terms of the actionability of it. We won't restate all of the research and all of the stuff. I mean, I guess I will restate some of it to say that I didn't just look at aggregate ADPs and aggregate scoring and compare them. I did things to look at specifically ceiling outcomes. So it was a couple different cutoffs. One was full season scoring. One was points per game scoring at a minimum of like at least 8 games. If they didn't get to so many full season points, but they were still kind of a league winner scorer while healthy. And then another one was the late season playoff hammers. If they scored enough points over the stretch of weeks that really matter at the end of the season. That was an even higher bar to clear. They had to be like a real hammer in the playoffs. It only adds a few players, but you wanted to know where those guys came in from as well in drafts, where this ceiling came from, where league winners came from, because the thesis was every running back is so risky, right? I always talk about these little hit, big miss, big hit, little miss type profiles. Every running back is a big miss profile in my mind. You can lose the work from injury. Obviously, you're taking so many carries. You can lose the work because you just lose the work because guys take it over. There's usually one effective back in a backfield. There's not enough great running back roles in the NFL. Wide receivers, you can have multiple in one offense. Remember when Pat Kerrane wrote the legendary Upside piece, he started it by saying that, talking about the dead zone research a little bit and saying that the dead zone doesn't start, the dead zone starts at the beginning of the draft, basically, was his way of putting it. And that was, the whole point of the legendary upside is like, you have to have legendary upside to justify the risk you take at any time that you take a running back selection. That's not so much true in best ball, because in best ball, a lot of people are, number one, you can't add guys off waiver wire and you can't do those things. And number two, you need like this. Part of the issue with the dead zone has always been this idea of guaranteed touches, which is obviously a fallacy. It doesn't actually exist, but we go through the projections and we don't have anywhere to put the touches, and so we project them out, and then we talk about, this guy's got a locked-in role. He's guaranteed for this many touches. Well, yeah, maybe that's the week one expectation, but that's not the way seasons go. Ask Chuba Hubbard last year. Rico Dowdle just took his lunch. Like, ask any number of other guys that are dead zone-y, and that's so circling all the way around. The way that you said it is guys that the market should know what they are. They've shown us what they are. They're veterans. They've produced before, but the market is not buying into that, are typically the ones with the risk. And that's where I've framed it in terms of the actionability. What actually makes a dead zone back? It's a player that should be going in the first 2.5 rounds. When I first did the research, the back half of round 3 was when I said this, the dead zone is really starting. Sometimes that guy could hit. It's like the transition period, the second half of round 2, picks 25 to 30, or not 25, 31 to 36, like that range. And I'm looking at Underdog right now. Breece Hall's going 28. I think he's like maybe the start of the transition range. I'm kind of comfortably into Breece Hall.
Yeah,
Kyron Williams
to me is like he's the fulcrum point of where, like, if someone wanted to say he's a dead zone-y profile, I get the argument. I'm still in, but it's it tilts right after him.
Yeah, because, he's in a bad offense that's going to pull the ADP down in some of those things. But to your point, we've seen it before, and people aren't drafting him in the first round anymore. So there's a little bit of that. Kyron Williams at 31, clear dead zone profile to me this year.
Yes,
even though,
I agree.
To your point with the rising costs, but this is an offense that is projected to score the most points in the league. He's the lead back. He scored 250-plus PPR points 3 straight years. There's no denying the production or the role that he has. People are concerned about Blake Corum, but he has all the receiving stuff. Blake Corum had about as bad of a receiving profile as Javonte Williams. If you look at it from yards per out run, these guys are like 0.3 yards per out run.
His hands suck. He can't catch.
So I'm like vaguely intrigued by Kyron's price, but I feel like there's some real dead zone-y stuff even where he's going. ETN right behind that, coming off a good year, just signed a huge contract. Total dead zone thing. Like, if the market's not buying in more than that, that's your red flag. Javonte Williams comes in after that, clear. Josh Jacobs, clear. David Montgomery,
the only
players
thing I'd
later.
Say about Josh Jacobs is that the market's factoring in suspension risk, and so I think that there is some level of uncertainty in his price.
That's right. He's not clear. You're right. I said that because of projected workload, but he actually doesn't have guaranteed touches, and there is some risk associated there. But David Montgomery, you're expecting guaranteed touches. DeAndre Swift comes after that. Now, I skipped Cam Scatterbo. He's coming off an injury.
Yeah.
I think he's an interesting, test case. And then behind DeAndre Swift, you get into Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins. Traditionally, when we talk about the young backs, the reason they can be in the dead zone, sometimes they're held down because of workload concerns. Travion Henderson would be a great example of this. There's a lot of people that will tell you that Ramondre Stevenson is going to play Yeah, is going to play more than him. And I think that's potentially very fair. What you hear about Trayvon Henderson's ADP is that it's too high. And typically speaking, that's actually an example of the type of player. Now, I'm not saying to be all in on Trayvon Henderson. He's got real concerns. But that's typically the example of it makes him an example of the type of player, a young player who we don't really know how good the guy is yet. He had some real issues last year, and he has people that hate on him for those, and that's fair. But because of that, he's pushed into the dead zone, and people are saying that's actually too high of an ADP. The fact that I would say there's more, the market is putting more upward momentum into his ADP. Like, they want to draft this guy. Why is he going as high as he is? That's weird. Typically with young players, that's where there's actually some real ceiling in the dead zone. You think back a couple of years to when Jahmyr Gibbs was a rookie. Breece Hall was coming off the ACL in year 2.
Dalvin Cook had just been signed.
And Travis Etienne was the other guy in that range, in the round 4 or 5 range. They were young players. The market didn't necessarily know who they were, and they all were really big dead zone hits in, 2023? And it was a huge season for dead zone production. It's that type of profile. You can go back a few years prior. The year I wrote it, I believe, Austin Eckler was behind Melvin Gordon still. I think he was a round 6, round 7 guy.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, he can't get enough volume. Melvin Gordon's there. He can't get enough volume. He ended up being a huge hit.
Pollard's breakout season in 2022 behind Zeke.
Behind Zeke.
Round. Yeah.
So it's a young guy, or it's a guy with volume concerns that the market is actually still buying. What you're seeing is a range of outcomes. ADP is always an element of wisdom of the crowds, and you're seeing an acknowledgement that within the range of outcomes, the concerns about workload, the concerns about role, and the concerns about what the player actually is, because there are young players that immediately go high, right? Jeremiah Love's going higher than any of these names that we've said. He's going ahead of Breece Hall immediately. Ashton Genty did last year. Omarion Hampton is going up there, even though he got hurt a little bit in his rookie year. We don't know necessarily what he is fully yet. Those guys, the market's buying into. They're telling you they totally believe it. So for a guy to be where Trayvon Henderson's going, or Cam Scadaboo's going, or Quinshon Judkins is going, or Bashal Tutin is a great example as well, there's real concerns about what this player actually is that are holding the price down. People think of those as too high of prices for Henderson and Tutin because we haven't seen it before. But typically, that's the type of profile that actually winds up hitting in the dead zone, as you were talking about. And so there's this element of, market forces working different ways. What picks do you actually want to make in the dead zone? It's a little counterintuitive. Again, I just finished all my projections. When I talk about the running back position with projections, it's the position I look at the least. And in fact, I look at it as if it's an inversely correlated thing.
Right.
The projection for David Montgomery is better than his ADP. That's what's pushing his ADP up. That's why people want to take that guy. The projection for Trayvon Henderson and Bashal Tutin is worse. They come in ranked lower in my running back projection results than where their ADP is. That's typically a sign that that's the kind of player you actually want to play into. The wisdom of the crowds and the market is giving you more information than what is in the numbers and in the projection and in the data. Because what you always want to be with at running back is not betting on guaranteed touches, not betting on pass production. It's nothing about pass production is helpful. You don't want to pay full price for pass production at running back. It's another way I phrased that in the past. And what you want to be doing is finding the next breakout, the next guy that's actually hitting on something that we haven't seen yet. Now, that's not necessarily true pre-dead zone. I will caveat that. The first 2.5 rounds or so, the first 15 or so backs or whatever it is, I think you can acknowledge at that point we have enough information about all of them, the market's into all of them, and you can do some of the projection and offensive wrangling about it. But when you start to get into the dead zone, that's where you start to get into market forces, wisdom of the crowd, really dictating who you should be willing to consider and who you shouldn't. But broadly, Jacob, I do think it's straightforward to your question. I do think this is a clear dead zone year. It doesn't mean that there might not be small wins in some of these cases, and that might be helpful for best ball. But guys like Kyron, guys like Etienne, guys like Javonte Williams are, to me, really, really tough plays at their ADPs. And to your point about them rising, I mean, that just makes them even easier to fade. Just because they're going in the back end of round 3 in some cases doesn't make them no longer dead zone backs if the whole landscape is pushed up. And there's a little bit of a gap there in round 3 is another way that you can kind of notice it, where I mean, especially by the middle of round 2, you have Derrick Henry at 17.8 ADP. The only two guys you have between that and the middle of round 3 are Jeremiah Love and Breece Hall. Between the middle of round 2 and then Kyren Williams coming at 31.3 ADP right now, which is the start of the back half of round 3. So, I mean, that's your sign as well. The market is willing to push Derrick Henry up with all these other guys. It is not willing to push other proven producers up, and there's a gap there. And yeah, those types of market forces to me has always been the thing that has been the explanation for why the research was what it was in 2020, and it's proved over the last 5 or 6 years as I've been tracking this to be a pretty helpful heuristic for identifying which backs you actually want to be drafting.
Yeah, I totally agree with a lot of that, almost all of that. And I definitely agree that I think these traditional dead zone profiles are actually an easier decision this year than they've been in the past, because they're getting priced, I think, more the way that they have been in the past. We're not having to face down, I think, a particularly difficult decision of, oh my God, like this guy who I would have hated to draft in round 3 is now going at the start of the 6th. Like, what do I do with this? The uncomfortable choices are some of the younger backs that you alluded to, because, you brought up Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall that year. Jonathan Taylor's another one comes to mind. Back in his rookie year, it was a huge dead zone hit when he was starting the year behind, in air quotes, Marlon Mack. Even DeAndre Swift had his rookie year that season too. He was. You're
saying behind was in air quotes, but I thought you put Marlon Mack into air quotes in my head there for a second.
No. I would never put Marlon Mack in air quotes.
Mack, who didn't exist.
All respect to Marlon Mack, and perhaps no one's ever had a more unfortunate turn of events from getting Jonathan Taylor drafted and then tearing their Achilles in like the first quarter of the season. Just tough one for Marlon Mack. But anyway, shouts to you, Marlon. Hope you're doing well. But I think those profiles were just like superior to the quality of the young upside bets that we have right now. And so I think that like I've written a lot in recent seasons about archetype-based drafting. The idea that you can neatly sort, and by no means am I suggesting that this is what you do or what your article recommended doing, but the idea that you could just neatly sort the dead zone or all of drafts into, okay, Javonte, David, Montgomery, ETN, these are profiles to avoid. We're done with those. And then, blindly clicking through some of the younger, more uncertain profiles. I think that what's interesting this year about how running backs have gotten priced up is, yes, there is a degree to which the quote-unquote boomer running backs have been priced up, but it's also, it seems as though the running backs that we would be more inclined to bet on in the dead zone strike me to be particularly inflated this season. And I'm curious if you agree or not, but like I look at Bashal Tutin, who's a guy that I feel pretty predisposed to be in on, and I am in on to an extent. I'm slightly over market. I think, you can't pattern match anything 1-to-1, but like a lot of people have now made this comparison. I wrote this up all the way back when I was in Peru with this comparison, but there's a ton of similarities between him and Chris Rodriguez as there were to Chase Brown and Zach Moss 2 seasons ago. In terms of a day 3 guy, didn't get a ton of play year 1, had an interesting profile people wanted to believe in, offense people wanted to believe in, and they signed like a pretty generic backup / 1B / some people think 1A to come in and compete with him. And at the time, like that year, Moss was going ahead of Brown for a lot of the summer. Brown pulled ahead late, but you were still getting Brown like round 7, round 8, even at the end of the summer. Tutin this year has been a fixture late round 5, occasionally falls at early round 6, but he's been like a mid-round 5 pick. Chris Rodriguez goes all the way in round 11. I mean, I think that's a more efficient pricing of this backfield. I think that's kind of how people should be playing, but I don't think that they're giving you a ton of excess value above the projection for Bashal Tutin. Like, I think they're making you pay a price that you have to be right. That he is, going to be a very talented player, that he's going to be the starting running back, because he's going around other guys that are pretty clearly the running back one on their team. And you can point out pretty fair reasons to doubt these profiles. And a lot of those dead zone heuristics are reasons why. But like he's going, kind of right next to like DeAndre Swift, for instance, who I think has probably a pretty similar upside case in some ways, you could argue. Trevion Henderson, I think, is the biggest example of this, where I can't really think of an example of the fantasy market being this unreactive to recency bias. Like, this was a guy whose team went to the Super Bowl and largely didn't play him. Like, he forget 1B. Like, in the playoff run, this guy was the 2. And I listened to your projections pod with the ETR guys today, and I thought you made some really great points that I agree with about how it was pretty complicated and it was a week-to-week thing of how these guys were alternating. And, you can't really just map on that late season push. But I wish that the market was looking at this and being like, when we last saw this team play, Ramondre was the obvious RB1 and Trevion was the 2, and we're going to draft it as such. And I would really like to draft Trevion Henderson in like round 7. The market not allowing us to do that, I think, again, is pretty efficient. But I don't know that I can sit here and say, I want to be betting on the guys with the pressurized profiles, the ones who are being held back due to uncertainty, and kind of just go through and blindly tick off those profiles. Where Henderson's going, there's a ton of downside risk. I do think he could be a big hit, but I think it's a big hit, big miss, and a bigger miss than maybe it would have been in previous seasons. So I'm curious where you stand on those two guys, but I do really think that they're being priced up to a degree that shifts a little bit of the conversation on how aggressively we should attack some of these younger, more uncertainty-based, more talent-based profiles.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen that over the last couple of years, and I think you're going to have eras and different things that occur. And I mean, one of the things that happened not too long ago at running back is because we had some really poor classes back to back, there was a stretch where there weren't any backs that were productive, at older ages. And I know I did some research on it for a while that was like, I mean, you basically can't draft a back who's older than 25. They're too old. And then, in the years since then, the next generation of running back has, I mean, Derrick Henry's like 32, and this dude just keeps trucking. Like, I mean, there's just going to be different stories based on the different athletes that come through. We're always kind of dealing with small samples when we do the aggregate stuff. And that's part of why when I looked at the dead zone stuff initially, I did like 10 years of research. And then I tried to, do some data cleaning with it and be really careful because you don't always have the right amount of ADP information, and wherever you draw your cutoffs and how you do those types of aggregate research, cohort analyses are going to dramatically impact what you actually come up with as a result. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, I don't want to say that I basically don't read those when I see them. I see that's one of the most common types of fantasy football analysis. And just to be blunt, like, it's one of the reasons I basically don't pay attention to them. Like, I will sometimes read the top line stuff, but like, if I didn't do it myself, I don't know that I trust the parameters of the person who did it. It's just a really tricky thing to get right. But anyway, as far as the ones you were asking about, I think they're really unique cases. I think everything you said about Trevion and what happened late in the season, and the way that I kind of talked about it on the ETR pod was, to emphasize that Ramondre Stevenson, he had some good plays in the pass game, and Trevion certainly had his issues in the pass game, and there were some quotes from McDaniels that more or less acknowledged that because Stevenson was, protecting as well as he was able to do more in the pass game. And he ends up with some big plays. He ends up with the second most running back air yards, which I wrote a whole piece about over at the Substack recently. He winds up the second most in the entire NFL, behind only Christian McCaffrey. And I think it's pretty clear that some of that work was meant for Trevion Henderson. But Trevion Henderson, because if you even just look at like the targets per out run, Trevion Henderson was higher. There was more intent to get him the ball in the pass game. There was more intent early in the season to get him involved. People don't realize Trevion Henderson had 50 more carries in the regular season last year. Like, one of the points you were saying about like Ramondre being the clear lead back at the end of the year, that really only occurred after Travion got his concussion. And then Ramondre had a great stretch the final 4 games. Through week 13, Ramondre Stevenson had a 3.2 yards per carry and a fumble problem. He was not an efficient runner. And then suddenly he was very good at the end of the season, incredibly good the last 4 games of the regular season. And then into the postseason, he had 2 good games in their first 2 wins, and then his rushing efficiency kind of lagged toward the back end of the postseason. He was good as a receiver again. Ramondre Stevenson's a good player. He's always been a good 3-down player. He's a good pass protector. I remember Pat Crane being really in on him when he was coming out and emphasizing his yards per out run as an underrated element of this, round 4 running back. Ramondre Stevens, a big back, but he was a good receiver in college, and he's always been able to do some of this stuff. I'm not trying to say that he's bad or anything like that. I do think if you look at it from an intent perspective, through that concussion that Henderson got, and then Stevenson flipping his ball in hand efficiency, his rushing efficiency so drastically down the stretch that it kind of became a no-brainer. Through that point, they were trying everything in their power to get Henderson the ball more, on the field more. He was a bust for fantasy purposes for a lot of the season. I mean, I'll note he was the only running back in the league who had 4 50-yard carries last year. I mean, he had these 4 long runs, and everyone acts like he was completely horrible. No other back in the NFL did that last year. It's not, the only relevant thing, but it's not like Henderson did nothing last year. That's over 200 rushing yards in those 4 plays alone, and that was the profile. The profile was explosive play guy, big play dude. Obviously, the profile was also supposed to be that he could pass block and do a lot of other things that he wasn't able to do. And so there are real concerns there, and there are real concerns with Ramondre Stevenson being the more trustworthy to coaches back, the more stable player. To me, it's a very specific situation that I don't know that like the dead zone rules are things that I want to make the decisions on anyway. Similarly, Bashal Tutin, because this may be like in 2023, Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall and those guys, that was the right answer. This may not be the same thing. Now, similarly, Bashal Tutin had a lot of issues last year. Really hard. A lot of people, like film watchers, smash his vision and say that he, can't find space and can't hit the hole. And to that point, Travion Henderson as well. One of the things that Sean would always tell me about the SIS data that he thought was so fascinating was Travion Henderson had one of the highest rates in the league of hitting the correct hole as it was blocked.
Yeah,
and it was like, do something else.
That does not surprise me because I was writing him up like weekly in the Hitchhiker's Guide. I felt like he was the guy that I wrote the most about because I felt like I had to cope a lot about him because I really liked him coming out. And one of the things that I said frequently was that, which was he is having rookie struggles, but they're not the stereotypical rookie struggles. Like I feel like a lot of the times when you think of young running back mistakes, you think of, I don't know why I'm going to rag on DeAndre Swift, but just he's like a guy that comes to mind as a guy who's frequently doing too much. Ken Walker can be a guy who occasionally does too much. Travion Henderson was a guy I thought was like doing too little in the sense of, he was like hitting the hole, but hitting the hole immediately without even like necessarily taking the time to look around and see what cutback lanes were developing. And I thought he was being a little bit uncreative, which I don't know which you'd rather have, but I thought it showed like almost like just an overthinking and a lack of confidence to be like, I have to follow the rules. Like my coach told me to go here and I have to run here because if I don't, like, then I'm going to get benched. And I probably unfairly at the time because I was mad because I had a lot of Henderson exposure. I like put some of the blame onto McDaniel where I felt like you've like created an environment to which your player is like clearly exhibiting a lack of confidence on the football field. And if you would give him some runway, I think he would like run more naturally. And I thought he did in that period where Ramondre got hurt. And that's when Henderson, of course, like exploded. But I disrupted that point, but I just wanted to emphasize how much I really agree with you that he was having rookie issues, of course, but he was like hitting the hole. It was just kind of inverse of how a lot of rookie issues are. I don't know if that's actionable, but I think it's interesting.
No, I think it's very interesting. The point I think I would get to on both him and Tutin, and for that matter, Quinshon Judkins and Jadarian Price, who are going in that range, is we don't yet know how good they are. And the way that I would frame that is to go back to the thing that we do on Stealing Bananas every year, Sean and I, where we predict next year's first and second round. One of the reasons we started doing that was we often would talk about guys, not just dead zone backs, but any player, as you want to draft guys that you know can be drafted in the first or the second round next year if they hit. It's a great heuristic for the dead zone as well. We go back to that Kyron Williams point. This guy's had 250 plus PPR points 3 years in a row, and he's still going in the back half of the third round. No one believes in Kyron Williams. No one believes in the Josh Jacobs one's not a good one, but let's say David Montgomery smashes this year. He's not going to be a second round pick next year. He's too old. He's too this or too that. Like there will not be market buy-in on him, even if you can envision a type of ceiling that is beyond what is probably there for David Montgomery. DeAndre Swift, you just mentioned him. He's going in the middle of the dead zone this year. He was going in the back half of the dead zone or a little bit later last year. He had an unequivocally successful 2025. He was efficient. He was better than the young player behind him.
He's ever played in his career, and I've said a lot of slanderous things about DeAndre Swift at times. I thought he looked like legitimately improved.
I thought he was better probably in the early Lions days, but still, I mean, I think it's a fair point. The offense was really good and took a big step forward. Monangai was efficient behind him, but Swift stayed ahead of Monangai. You had to feel great about what happened in 2025 with Swift, and they added no one. There's no other mitigating factors. He's going at a 50.5 ADP this year. He's still in the dead zone. Yep. It's the type of player that even when they hit, they can't. No one's buying into DeAndre Swift and going, this is a second-round pick next year.
Absolutely not.
If Travion Henderson cleans up some of the stuff and shows the explosiveness and shows some like Devon Achane or Jahmyr Gibbs type explosive player ceiling and receiving potential and all of those things, and he's not making the mistakes in pass protection or running into the right hole too many times to a degree that he looks like a rookie on the field, and instead in year two, he becomes the round 2 draft pick, draft capital player that people wanted him to be last year, myself included, yourself included. Travion Henderson can easily be a round 2 pick next year. He could be a round 1 pick next year. Quinshon Judkins, exact same thing. Round 2 draft capital. You would have some Browns team concerns, but if he has a great year and a healthy year this year, he's not coming off injury next year, I absolutely believe he could be a round 2 pick next year. Bashal Tutin, no-brainer to me. Even though he's a round 4 guy, but he was the second pick of round 4. But the long-term expectation and profile on him, the evasion rate, all of those things, very strong. Liam Cohen seems to like him. They're talking about him favorably. There's intent to utilize him. If he has a breakout year, if he has some long runs, if he has a lot of yardage, and is even just a pretty good pick, his ADP is going to rise next year.
Totally.
I think pretty quickly. Jadarian Price goes right behind him. Same deal. I mean, and Jadarian Price isn't even a guy that, from a skill set perspective, I think most people are convinced on because he was a backup to Jeremiah Love. But if first round draft capital, if he goes out and even if he just ends this season looking like the Seahawks workhorse, he's going to be a round 2 pick next year. I mean, he's going to go in rounds 1 or round 2. That's not the only heuristic. Like, you need points this year. It's not helpful just that, like, if the guy finished the season as the lead back or took over the lead back role going into the postseason and it didn't help you in your regular season fantasy football league at all, that's going to mean something. But it is, I think, a valid way of thinking through the current price and whether there's meat on that bone in terms of what they can do this year. If you think about what the market may think of them next year, you're going to, I think, be able to frame that in a way that tends to be helpful. So, yeah, as far as Henderson, Tutin, and those guys are concerned, like I have the concerns about the individual profile, but as far as the dead zone goes and the macro stuff and where running back's going and where we're at, the state of the running back position, I think it's straightforward. You can play them. You're making a bet that can miss at the same time. There's obvious risk associated with it as well.
All right, I'll ask you a direct question because I'm curious now. So I'll Judkins, Scattaboo, Tutin, Henderson, Price, 5 young guys that are in this dead zone range. If you had to pick one to have the highest exposure on in best ball, 1, and 2 to have on your only main event team, but in this world you can pick any spot in the draft, but you have to draft them at ADP. That's the caveat. Who would you pick?
I think it's a really hard question to answer. I don't want to cop out, but it's a really hard question to answer. I'm gonna cop out a little bit. I'll give you an answer in a second, but
All right.
to give the listeners a more actionable answer, I think the fact that you just named 5 dudes with relatively similar ADPs gives you as much, and none of them to me is the glaring answer. The way that I would prefer to play it is to actually get some of these dudes after ADP when I can, to have a little bit of balanced exposure, to let the fact that there is a group of them, because I do think of those 5 guys, we're likely to get 1 or 2 hits. I think it'd be very surprising if they're all big misses, but I also think there are real concerns across that landscape. I think it makes sense that Scadaboo's going highest. He was a high-value touch stud last year. He seems healthy. He's the one that I immediately feel the most comfortable with. He would have been a star if he didn't get hurt last year, and he'd be going in the second round already.
If he didn't get hurt, he'd be going right where Hampton goes, I think.
Yeah, I think he'd be going in the second round already. So the fact that you get him in the 4th round, I mean, he's the one that, but I also don't like the Giants offense. Like, I'm worried about Neighbors' health. I want to be on Neighbors, but especially if Neighbors is not healthy, like you got Matt Nagy and Greg Roman running the show. Like, this is not what I want in my 2026, investment. I think that my answer honestly might be Henderson. I think it would probably be one of Henderson, Judkins, or Tootin. But man, I mean, Price even, it's a little bit of a tricky one. Again, I can see the ceiling cases for each of them. I haven't drafted a ton. I am still very tantalized by Travion Henderson's profile. I'm concerned about Ramondre Stevenson. Certainly. I won't say Judkins because of the offense. It's the same thing I said about Scadaboo. If I had to take one, I would want it to be the one that I felt like could hit the hardest. That could be a first-round pick next year. I maybe don't see that for Judkins. I maybe don't see that for Scadaboo. I think I see it more for Henderson, Tootin, Price, even. I think there's some weird upside with Price that is probably being missed by the market a little bit. There's all this talk of the other guys, but the Price play to me is a very straightforward rookie ceiling price. If he's just better than everyone, they'll keep him on the field.
I mean, that might be some of the edge is that the nerds don't like Price's profile that much, and it's like fascinating to me that like a round 1 rookie in Price is going after the year 2, day 3 guy in Tootin. Like that's like a major shift in the market, pricing in a lot of the like database prospecting profile stuff compared to, I think, the more simplistic of like, hey, round 1 rookie versus year 2, round 4 pick. Like that's a change, and they might have overcooked the change. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about Price, we don't know that he can be a workhorse. I like a workhorse profile. I will say that when he was in high school at a 5A school in Texas, about the highest level of high school football there is, he was a workhorse for multiple years. Like, it was nice to see that when you dug a little deeper into his profile. He wasn't a workhorse at Notre Dame. They still tried to get him the ball in his hands as a kick returner, and he was a very good kick returner. They did other things with him. The per-touch efficiency was good. I don't mind projecting him forward as a pretty decent workhorse bet, but he is a tricky one. In the spirit of me saying I think Scadaboo is actually the cleanest answer, but he is the most expensive. In the spirit of me saying the way that I would want to play it is the cheapest way, and your parameters being that I have to take the guy at ADP. I think it would have to be either Tootin or Price. I honestly think I would have to break the tie. I'll say Price. I'll say the absolute cheapest one. I do think Price has legit ceiling, but Tootin's a really tantalizing one as well. What would your answer be? Now I want to hold you to the fire.
Yeah, so my best ball answer is the easier answer. My best ball underdog answer is Judkins because I think the floor is really high for the price. I feel really comfortable with the touch count. I also feel pretty excited about the talent upside. So I kind of feel like I get almost the best of both worlds of the dead zone profile. Like I get all of the projected volume while I also get a little bit of talent upside as a treat. But like that's specifically a best ball take because that's where I could see a lot of games for Judkins where if you're watching the game, you feel really happy to have Judkins because it looks like he's having a great game. But then you look at the box score at the end of the game, and he had 23 carries for 88 yards, 1 catch, 8 yards. And it's like, well, shit, that wasn't as good as I thought it was. And
that's the part I'm concerned about is Samson.
So for an underdog best ball take, where like those 10-point weeks actually have some value because you can't make waiver replacements, you're not doing start sit, and so just the ability to like fill RB2 a lot, and then hopefully you also get to mix in some more explosive weeks. I like his profile for that. You get into the FFPC main event half of my question, and Judkins' profile becomes less interesting because those 10, 11, 12-point floor weeks are way less compelling to me. I'm trying to now make a ceiling case, and I think he falls out of the conversation. At that point, it's a tough call. Like, I don't want to say price because I didn't like the prospect profile, like at all. But I do think, I guess it gets to the point that I set up. I think that the market has incorporated some things that I really care about to the degree that I feel like I'm kind of taking the other side on some things. And I think that price, especially, you know, where we're going all in for the ceiling outcome, and he goes at a pretty different tier of wide receiver than I think some of these other guys go, where he's going into the 6th round in the main event. Like that would be my pick, I think, would be Price. Probably my second choice there would be Henderson. But I think I would lean Price ever so slightly.
Price, I mean, to continue to make the Price case, and I don't necessarily want to make the Price case to this degree. There's a little bit of a concern in ceiling with the receiving side of it as well, but like we're talking, like I would be more concerned about Price if Emmanuel Wilson was getting buzzed. We're talking about George Holani as like a real threat. This is a guy who's been a special teams guy. Like this is the Longview show, man. We talk about Longview players. George Holani was fun last year when he played. He looks like bouncy and efficient and all that stuff. Guy's 26 years old with 28 career offensive touches. He's 26 years old out of Boise State, like former UDFA, worked his way up as
a field as a freshman.
Is that right? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, he was. Well, I mean, it was George Holani's like, I don't know, his 9th season in college, something like that. And it was Genty's freshman year, but Holani was the lead back on that team.
Amazing. And I don't think he's terrible or anything to that effect, but the point that he didn't keep him off the field. I just pulled it up. Genty had 1,300 yards.
Wait, what year is this that you're looking at?
Oh, I'm looking at, so that's Holani's final season. You're talking about, that was Genty's 2nd season. You're right.
Yeah.
Holani had more yards than him, but then the next year Genty overtook Holani in Holani's final season. Yeah. Okay. I'm wrong.
He also didn't even keep him off the field because Genty still had 800 yards as a true freshman. But like, anyway, I'm being facetious. Yeah, right, he's not an excellent prospect.
The point about Holani and even Emmanuel Wilson to this perspective, and even Zach Charbonnet when healthy, which, by the way, Charbonnet's injury was so late in the year. There's all these positive reports. There are positive reports about every injury rehab guy right now, and it's actually one of the things that I think is the biggest edge. Probably it's driving me nuts right now how everyone is just like, yeah, I'm hearing positive reports. I want to play it. I'm like, have you guys learned any lessons about everything we've ever learned about injured players? It's a challenging thing for it to get right, for the rehab to continue to go perfectly well, for there not to be another injury or a setback. And then when they get on the field, for them to play at that level, there's very few examples of this actually working out in a really, really favorable way. Some of the guys like Scadaboo and Judkins, where it was more like a break for those guys, right? If I'm not mistaken, like I'm okay with the bone break and the rehab. Like that's a little bit more straightforward, especially with younger players like them. But the ones that are coming back from like ligament tears and like injuries with significant re-injury risk. We talked about the LaPorta thing, a herniated disc for me even. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that one. I don't know. But just broadly speaking, I do think the entire market is too optimistic about injury rehabs right now. That's just one broad take. And Zach Charbonnet is one of the examples where we got a guy coming off an ACL who was never a special prospect.
He didn't even have surgery until February. it's really hard to make the case that Charbonnet is going to be a meaningful piece of the story unless Price is like injured or just an outright bust, and Charbonnet comes back, and they're like, thank God we need something because this George Holani guy is nothing, and Price is hurt or terrible. But like, he would need to be like awful. Like if Price is rolling, like cool, Charbonnet, we're super happy you're back, and you'll play on 3rd and 8.
And that's the important point, because the entire point of drafting Jadarian Price would be they liked him enough to draft him in the first round. You buy into the profile enough. You buy into rookie upside enough, and he can hit and be extremely good at the NFL level. We don't know what this player is yet. What's holding his price down is George Holani and Zach Charbonnet maybe coming back, and those are completely irrelevant to the Jadarian Price bet. It couldn't be less relevant. Ramondre Stevenson is way more relevant to the Travion Henderson bet than those guys are to the Jadarian Price bet. Now, I think Henderson's profile is better than Price's probably, but Price had a higher draft capital. But like I'm literally Ramondre Stevenson's a decent player, and he finished the year well. Like I'm concerned about Henderson's ability to completely, I mean, if he hits in a real meaningful way, it's clear he has the ceiling upside that Stevenson doesn't, and I would think he would pretty clearly take the whole backfield and run with it. If
Stevenson is like a slightly better, healthy Charbonnet.
Yeah, he's a better, healthy Charbonnet. That's a way of putting it. Both of those things. And we also have concerns about Henderson. We saw him at the NFL level, and maybe some of those things don't progress. I think the upside case is that they do, but if he's not able to figure out the pass blocking this year, like that's going to be a major problem for him in fantasy. For Jadarian Price, we don't know. He was behind a guy that people absolutely love as a prospect in Jeremiah Love. And yes, I would have liked to have seen him do a lot more, but if Jadarian Price is a star at the next level, that wouldn't be that surprising. Just because Roschon Johnson wasn't behind Bijan Robinson doesn't mean that Jadarian Price can't be. And also, like, Roschon Johnson didn't get drafted as high, and the way that the team scouted him was not the same way. Jadarian Price got scouted in a very favorable way. There's just too much pattern matching. Broadly.
I'm not even that big. I could nitpick the Price profile, but if we want to do the upside case, one hugely important thing is I don't know if Notre Dame ever recruits Love. If Jadarian Price doesn't have, now I'm forgetting if it was an ACL tear or an Achilles tear. I think it was an ACL tear prior to ever playing a game at Notre Dame. So he gets recruited. He misses his entire first season. And then that next offseason, when they don't even know what Price will be, that's when they recruit Love. And so Love's freshman season, he's coming in, he's playing a little bit ahead of Price. They're both playing behind Audric Estime, another NFL back who obviously didn't amount to a whole lot. But that season that Love jumps Price is rehabbing from a very serious season-ending injury. And so then he never catches back up. I do think it's notable that it's not like they got a look at Price, said, you're not good enough, we want to replace you. Had Price come out as a true freshman, been great for them. Maybe they don't even recruit Love to come in ahead of him. I have no idea. But it's more context of the profile, I think, in college of kind of why things worked out the way it did. That still doesn't mean you still can't give credit for someone doing things they didn't do, even if there's excuses for why they didn't do what they didn't do. But it is interesting context. And the other thing you can say about Price that you could never say about Roschon Johnson, at least, is he is really explosive. Didn't test as well at the combine as I wanted him to for like an explosive back, but he does have a lot of juice, and clearly I think that's what Seattle's hoping to get out of him is an explosive profile, and it's not something that they have from anyone else in their backfield at all. Even a perfectly healthy Zach Charbonnet doesn't give you that.
Now, saying all of this, and we've talked through these guys in the dead zone, we were broadly saying that there is a clear return to the dead zone with some of the veterans. I do think all of these guys going here, I said that I think there's going to be some hits in that group. I also think there's going to be some pretty clear busts, and it's pushing down some guys. I mean, maybe not clear busts. I don't necessarily know that I believe that statement, but I think there's going to be some misses. Regardless, I think it is pushing down some guys. We're still getting the post dead zone. Like, this guy projects for a lot of volume, and I'm kind of weirded out why he's going there. And some of the people who've liked Ramondre Stevenson have pointed that out. I think that's the case with Jalen Warren and Rico Dowdle, both, frankly. I tend to like Warren more, but if you think that, like I do, that they're going to get a lot of pass volume, there's definitely something there. I'm kind of scrolling down as I'm saying this. J.K. Dobbins is a tricky one because of health, but like
the entire
he's
Broncos backfield is really interesting. Maybe we get in like and go player by player in this range in a future episode as we close in on 2 hours here. But I agree. The Broncos backfield gets really interesting.
And then Brooks,
the Commanders
Gainwell
backfield is super interesting.
Right.
Like, that's
I was gonna get to
spot, and even if it's not my guy Rachaad White, it's like
no, I think it probably is. I was gonna get to Rachaad White and then Jordan Mason. Rachaad White and Jordan Mason are the two that make no sense to me because I think they're both really high floor plays that are going in the triple digits, and it's surprising to me.
I'm very glad to hear that you're on my side of the Rachaad White thing because that's the one division I've not yet heard you on the projections for. We talked about him a little bit, so I thought you might be, and it's especially good to hear because, like myself, I don't think that you've really been like the world's biggest Rachaad White cheerleader over time, and like in fact, a pretty big Rachaad White detractor. But this is a spot where I think he has a ton of upside and a pretty high floor in that spot. So yeah, it's interesting. Tony Pollard is another one that goes like in this slightly post back end of the dead zone.
And then you run out fast. Like you get Aaron Jones after Jordan Mason,
and then it's like
Ja'Cory Krosky. I could play Ja'Cory Krosky. The next pick I would make is Keaton Mitchell. The two that come up are Chris Rodriguez and Tyrone Tracy. Tracy has such a sort of a trap back profile even when he hits. Like Devin Singletary was taking all the goal line work from him last year. But I mean, you could certainly play Chris Rodriguez and Tyrone Tracy, and then Keaton Mitchell. Woody Marks, now that there's some reports, I mean, maybe you want to get into that. And then it's Isaiah Pacheco.
I'm not buying these reports.
Yeah, I'm not either. I made a slight change to my projections as a result and wrote about that today, but that's because I was too high on David Montgomery. Isaiah Pacheco comes behind that. Woof. Tyjae Spears
is going to be James Conner after he's cut from the Cardinals, and he goes.
There you go.
Petzing.
Tyjae Spears, Jonah Coleman, who I was really into and I think is actually going to play a little bit as an RB3, is expensive there. Zach Charbonnet, we just got done saying, if Jadarian Price hits, they're going to delay when Charbonnet comes back because they're thinking about the postseason. Dude, if he could be ready by week 8, they'll bring him back in week 12 if their running back room's going fine. That's the way that this works these days. Like, they're not going to push him if they don't have to, so they can have him ready for the postseason. Whatever. Charbonnet's not expensive at RB49. It just gets to the next guy is Tank Bigsby, RB51.
I think Charbonnet is like completely unplayable.
Me too.
In best ball formats, it is so debilitating to spend a real pick on a 0 for 8 to 12 weeks. And in redraft, it like theoretically could work, but you're going to get to a point in week 4 where there's someone you're going to want to pick up, and you're going to have 2 or 3 injuries on your bench that you don't want to cut. And you're going to have like a bye week quarterback or bye week tight end you don't want to cut. And you're just going to end up cutting your round 12 pick because you're just going to run out of spots to hold a guy for 10 to 12 weeks. I think he's undraftable.
So, and just as we were doing the state of the running back position, the way that I would close up my thoughts, because I agree with you on Charbonnet, is that range is a really tough pocket to be wanting to take running backs. There's the value in the Rachaad White area. You can do some of the dead zone young guy stuff, but you do probably want some exposure early. I do understand more as I got through projections and understood the market more why people were saying you got to take all these early running backs this year, because I do think every year is a good year for 0RB. I'm sick of hearing that 0RB is dead. You don't understand it if you think that's true. You can absolutely execute 0RB any year. You can execute it this year even though there's not good late round ones. I promise you. I absolutely promise you. But there are some late round running backs. So people will be like, well, if you're saying that running backs, I'm not saying running backs dead when Isaiah Pacheco and Jonah Coleman and Zach Charbonnet come up, by the way. Like, Tank Bigsby at RB51 is a great value. Dylan Sampson's an intriguing one in PPR to me. A little while later, Ray Davis is going RB57. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. Jaden Blue, 58. Marshawn Lloyd, 59. Josh Jacobs has real issues. I understand Lloyd's never stayed healthy, but like I would make that pick. Even later, RB66, Damon Claiborne is a really interesting day 3 running back in a backfield that is very uncertain, and Claiborne's profile is pretty interesting. There's like Running backs you can take super late. Dude, if you want a crazy one, you just said James Conner. I think they might cut Trey Benson. If they cut Trey Benson, he's going to be a smash.
That could be two. I mean, one of them is not going to be on the roster. One of them is going to get traded, I think, or cut. And both of them become immediately interesting. I agree with you that running back kind of comes back to being interesting at the very end. And I totally agree with you on that the like 130 to 160 range of ADP feels so dead. Like in terms of just... It's like a couple interesting guys, but yeah, it's a lot of like Woody Marks, Pacheco, like that, Tracy, like that. Those are all like massive avoids to me that feel like we've gotten past anyone who has a realistic chance to be an RB1, and like some teams need a running back, so we've kind of just had to price these guys up without any rhyme or reason to it, and so some of these guys are moving up, and it's tough to play. I think where the late round guys diverge a little bit is I think a lot of the fun guys are just better picks in a redraft format than in a best ball format. And I think that a lot of the content gets fused between the two without that distinction, because you mentioned a guy like Claiborne, Lloyd, Blue. I'll throw in Katron Allen.
Brooks.
I'll throw in Nick Singleton. Like these are all plays.
Who do you like behind Chase Brown?
No.
I think Taj Brooks can. Yeah, I mean, for redraft, I think you can do the Taj Brooks thing.
Yeah, you could. Saying. You totally could. But so, like, a lot of these guys, you know, a lot of these guys are really tough to play in best ball because
fair.
If you take Claiborne, Singleton, Katron, Blue, like these guys have like pretty reasonable slices in their range of outcomes where they're just like zeros. Like Damon Claiborne he might be like Jarquez Hunter last year, right? He might just literally never be active on game days and like might not play an offensive snap. And that, if you take that in best ball, even as a late round pick, that's like really debilitating, especially if it's a big part of your portfolio. But in redraft, I think a lot of these guys are really interesting. And as you turn from best ball content, you know, which is what a lot of what's kind of dominated the airwaves, to redraft content, and we're going to do, I think, redraft focused content for the rest of this offseason, then I think that all of a sudden some of the 0 RB targets become a lot more interesting really fast, because you can take shots on the Claibornes, the Singletons, the Katron Allens, the Jaden Blues, all these other guys. You can even take stabs, like you mentioned with Brooks, at the RB2 battles. Like in best ball, I think like Colts RB2 is kind of not draftable right now, because it's like, you're telling me I have to take a 50-50 shot, you know, between Seth McGowan and DJ Giddens for a guy who's going to play 5 snaps a game when Jonathan Taylor's healthy? Like, that doesn't sound great. But in redraft, it's like, sure, why not? You know, you're going to find out who the RB2 is immediately. And if it's not the guy you took, you cut him. Big whoop. And if it is a guy you took, you just stick him on the roster, see if anything happens with Taylor. So those kind of guys become way, way, way more interesting as you change format. And I think that there are not a lot of shows, frankly, that do a good enough job of clearly delineating advice between best ball and redraft, and the types of profiles that are interesting to one as you get down the board become very different. I think, like, you know, you want to talk about Jahmyr Gibbs? It's probably not that important to delineate between best ball and redraft. Like, I think he's just a pretty good pick. But like when you get into like a David Montgomery versus a Trevion Henderson, the discussion has to include that format discussion, and your whole draft plan has to include that format discussion because of what you're mentioning at the end of drafts and what's available and what's not.
I completely agree. For anyone who wants, I guess, some more of my thoughts on that, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago about, or called Best Balls Probably Making You Worse at Redraft, to try to talk through some of what you just said. I love the way that you framed it there. Jawar Jordan is the one that I'm going to throw out at you. That's a super deep one.
That guy's
if
fun.
You want to, he was pretty good at the end of last year. Woody Marks struggled, and Jordan started to take a little bit of his work. If David Montgomery falters or gets injured or whatever, Jawar Jordan is about the latest redraft running back as I'm scrolling down that I can justifiably make a case for. But I do think, Jacob, at 2 hours and plus minutes, and because I have to board a flight here in a little
should be
while,
like a rule in fantasy football podcasting that if you bring up Jawar Jordan, just got to end the show.
Yeah, closing time starts playing.
Portion of the show, it's probably
closing time.
Oh, good voice.
It's time for you to shill for us. What do we got?
Yeah, I'll shill for us. So as I said at the beginning, we massively appreciate all the positive feedback. We're in our infancy as a podcast, and we live in an algorithm-based internet. So if you enjoyed the podcast, please give us a rating on Apple, on Spotify. Give us a like. Give us a subscribe wherever it is that you listen to our podcast. And lastly, I do want to bring up the Patreon. We have not posted anything, other than the episode in the Patreon so far. We are going to do some draft streams in August. Those are going to be Patreon membership only. And we'll see what else comes out of that. But more than anything, we want to keep doing this podcast kind of the way that we're doing it, which is longer form. We don't have ads at the moment. We're not, trying to optimize around the SEO as much as possible. We're trying to give you the best content for you. And so best way that you can support us being able to do that is with the Patreon membership, which is $8 a month. We would vastly, vastly appreciate it. And of course, if that's not something you can do, we appreciate all of the support in any way that you can. So thanks for letting me shill.
And thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back next time. We'll be talking, wide receivers probably? I don't know. Maybe tight ends, maybe QBs. I don't think we figured that out yet.
We haven't for sure, but we'll figure that out between now and then.
That's right. All right. We'll talk to you guys later.